call this meeting to order. It's 7:47. 13 minutes.
Thank
And
you,
Mr.
Lisa.
Josephson will not be here tonight, owing to illness. Mr. Sheffield, I guess, is still out of town.
Yeah. You still aren't quite right.
All right, you have something to say before we
I've changed the word.
proceed?
Hey, just the Planning Commission had a special session at noon today, and they reviewed, among other things, the planning part of that we have to do. And they were tremendously impressed, and they said that if we can continue in that same vein, that they saw every reason to feel that the charter would pass. They were delighted at how succinct, and it seemed to cover the important parts, and they said keep up with that same approach. And I
That's great praise.
I would think so too.
I just, there will be a letter coming to Chairman Reed.
You couldn't wait. We're delighted. I know it.
Okay. But no, I think there was a little bit of advice that I was passing along there, that we maintain a clearly understood, concise charter.
Yay. Well, I'd like you to know, just for interest's sake, that I gave my proposed service area assessment district to Bill Beatty, and as anybody that is not author or something, he came up with a shorter version, but it says almost as much as mine did. So I'd like to pass it out, but I think that I'm going to...
Mark the date on it.
No, I need to pass dates out, but these shouldn't have. But this is the shorter, they get shorter each time, so you know which way it's going.
Thank God. Let's see.
I think that last sentence is going to need to be re-extended. But other than that last sentence needing to be re-extended,
Let's add, we're not going to talk about that tonight.
no. I'm passing around to you some more.
Mary.
You can sit. I was too lazy to get
That's all right.
No problem.
Fine.
The time.
Oh, I see. What did I just get? Section 905, 410. 410, 75.
This is a new revised service area. Mary, from Mary and Bill Beatty.
And there are two things. I think that last sentence needs to be extended a little bit. And I think there were two words left out in B that weren't intended to. After created, it should have comma extended or abolished in B. In B of this version, there should be comma extended or abolished added before with. And the last sentence should have, I thought it would be all right without it, but I've read it and reread it, and I don't like it without that last part of that last sentence, which is comma after therefore,
Thereof.
yeah, after thereof, and then residents or users, comma, and the demand or burden placed upon the service for improvement by the user, which is the rest of the sentence in the last version I gave you.
Residents or users.
Residents or users, comma, and the demand or burden placed upon the service or improvement by the user. Now, I'm not sure whether by the user can be cut out there or not. I think maybe it can be left off without...
Read all C is no,
Yeah. C reads, costs within an assessment district shall be distributed proportionally according to the nature and extent of the benefit to the property or portion thereof, comma, residents or users, comma, and the demand or burden placed upon the service or improvement by the user. And I'm not sure what by the user could be eliminated. I haven't quite made up my mind. But Bill did shorten it to about half, and I think it does include everything that is essential. I suspect that most of what was left out was a nice thought, but something that couldn't be proved. The ability of the pay for it.
Sounds good, Mary.
And I'm not aiming to work on it anymore until next week when we look at it.
All right. And you'll change it again by then, so why don't we wait until next week?
Okay.
We have a set of minutes from March 28th, but we agreed that we lay them over for a week, so they were only distributed last night, yesterday, so we'll consider them.
One page on it.
We'll consider them next Wednesday. There have been no appearance. There have been no appearance requests. I know if no unfinished business, waive the charter.
There was unfinished last night, too.
No new business, so we go to reports.
New business. I did
We
want to
go
bring up,
Huh?
could I bring up a
Yes.
piece of new business? As the commission is well aware of, we have a survey that's in process right now, and very soon we'll be seeing the results of this process. I think for the protection of the commission, and also to protect the commission against any accusations by the public that we misspent the funds in the survey, I think it would be wise if this commission would direct Edith Walters to contact the persons taking the survey and have them provide us a certification of the survey. The certification, what I'm talking about, is something that would read to the effect that the Rowan Group has, in the process of taking this survey, contacted in person the following 200 people, and we certify to this, and it's signed and notarized, and it's attached to our billing, and then we pay it. But I think with a certification of that type, which is common in business to get, it protects us as a commission. Also, it ensures us that we're using something that is valid, because we're going to determine a lot of decisions on this survey. And it's all protective as far as the public interest is concerned. I would propose, Mr. Chairman, that we direct our executive secretary to proceed and procure such a certification with the survey.
Something on the order of proof sheet,
Second.
error sheet from the newspaper.
Right. Well, what we'd like to see are the 200 names of the people contacted. In other words, I beg pardon? All right. If they contracted for 330 names, they should certify to the fact the following 330 names were contacted in person, and this survey was so derived, and an officer of the company should sign that, should be notarized, and when it's attached to our billing, that's when we'll make the final payment.
Do we know who those 330 people are, or isn't it a part of the poll that their identity would remain?
No, we paid for it, and we're entitled to know the identity.
No, as I understood it, it says this is a confidential questionnaire, and we don't even know who they are.
Well, we should.
No.
Chairman,
What if we don't do
I
that?
think
Huh?
we better,
Then it's not a valid survey.
Oh, yes, it is.
Mr. Chairman, I think we better enter into some dialogue about it, because I suspect that you would not get this even from national polling outfits on any survey.
It's unfortunate. We didn't think of this in the beginning.
No, it would not have made any difference, I'm quite certain.
You would have to told the person that you were divulging their names to people on permission.
I'm not sure, but what this could be kept as personal.
Mr. Holmes,
I think, Fred, that this kind of information you would get if you were doing a marketing survey and you were asking people for their reactions to a product. But when you're asking people for this kind of information and they are led to believe that their name will not be used, we could probably obtain the same results by getting a notarized statement that 330 individuals distributed in the following pattern were contacted, and that the results or that the names of those people are on file, or the surveys are on file with the group, rather than they're giving us.
Well, the thing is, the reason we should have the names, in the event we wanted to make a spot check, or some agency of the government wanted to make a spot check to make, or an audit of that survey, they have to have those names to make the spot check.
But if it were on file, if they certified that the name, that the questionnaires were on file with their surveying group, that I think that would be perfectly adequate. They
Well, you
have the
see-
names and the phone numbers for the spot check for their surveying purposes, and I find that to be all that's required.
That's a lot of work. I mean, if they will only certify to it, that's all you want, is a certification.
Just certify that they have
That of the
contacted 300 people.
350 names, but it should be so that there's a trail back to it, an audit. If an audit is ever made,
Fred, I think basically it's my understanding that folks are right in stating that this was conceived on the basis that the opinions expressed would be confidential. Now, I can see the certification by a Rowan group, and I'm sure that if it came down to something that was really questionable, whether it's Rowan group or anybody else, you could go to court, you could subpoena and all that, but I don't think that there would be necessary. I think if we have the certification by the Rowan group, I think that should serve the purpose. I know that going back to the individuals might be very valid.
well, what is the protective device that we have on that? I mean, they can certify that they have 350 names on file, and they could gin up 350 names very quickly.
Like you said a little bit ago, Fred, I think if we were going to say something like this, we should have said it first. But
It's unfortunate that we didn't.
I
But
think under a certain, all we could ask.
and as far as this being proprietary, that is not so, because I've been involved in numerous surveys, for instance, with the FCC and whatnot, and they will not accept the survey unless it is fully certificated. And these companies, if they've done that work, know that they have to do that.
I'd have no question asking Rowan Group if they could supply this and would supply it within the bounds of their contract with us. If they can't, I think all we can ask for is a certification that they have done this job.
Well, I'll go with that. Can we ask that they provide it, and if they don't,
Mr. Chairman, Fred did make a motion, and I did second. I don't know if the chair recognized it, to ask for a certification. I did not second it, however, with the request for the names. I think that's, it is a confidential survey. It states it very clearly at the end that it is not necessary for people to give their names. And I personally feel if we're dealing with a reputable firm, that's adequate. And the question of having a certification, I think is fine, and will certainly go along.
can I follow on what you said, Alice, and ask that the phrase be inserted there that they'll certify that the 300 names were taken in person, and that they are subject to audit. In other words, they will accept audit if audited by a government agency or a municipal agency.
Mr. Chairman, not, you can make that an amendment. I would need to know more of what the normal procedure dealing with these kinds of firms would be insofar as an audit is.
Generally, a firm like that is audited by Price Waterhouse or Pete Marwick and Mitchell. After they take the survey, they have an accountant come in and audit the survey for them, and the accountant will certify that it's a valid survey. Otherwise, there's always a possibility that an enumerator did not contact X number of people. And the firm could be extremely reputable, but an enumerator could cause them a hell of a problem.
Well, Mr. Chairman, again, it's stated, and there's a copy here, that it is a confidential survey. I think that if we get into the question of possibility of an audit, that we have perhaps need some legal advice on it, because I think it's,
Well, you can
we're
audit something
asking that
confidential. You
that
can audit
be
something without
violated.
disclosing it. An audit firm can do it without disclosing it.
Well, Fred, and Marlon, if we can take your motion and ask for a certification with an audit
If required.
if within the ethics of what they have done.
Right.
If not, so to put it another way, can we take your motion on a different basis and ask for a change of a motion to instruct chairman to contact the group and report back with some sort of a answer for your questions?
Fine, I'll
Mr. Chairman, I'd offer a substitute motion that would request the chairman to contact the road group and determine the extent of the survey as to possible audit and certification to report back to the full commission.
I'll buy that.
Moved and seconded. Substitute motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? So ordered. Now I guess we go to the main motion as substituted or something.
Discussion to substitute.
Not unless it's so stated, really.
Are there any questions on the main motion?
What's the main motion?
The same that you just voted on.
Okay.
Not? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? So ordered. Now, is there any further new business to come before the commission? If not, we'll go to the Board of Charter Prevention Committee. Sherry Holmes. Article 2, Assembly Sections 204 and 209.
Well, here we are again.
I move. Oh, pardon me.
You move for adoption of the entire charter. Okay. Determining vacancies, for those who were not here last night, Jane. We had passed the compensation section as written, and we were debating the determination of vacancies, and we had questions concerning B subsection 3 becomes physically or mentally incapacitated. I'm unclear as to where we stood, if we had a motion carrying over, or if we cleared it to just bring it back up again anew tonight.
I don't have any indication here of a motion being carried over. Did you find
I
it?
didn't bring my minutes.
Well, then let's just
It
assume that
wasn't.
there was not.
No.
Mr. Chairman,
Arliss?
get something on the floor. I'll move for approval of section 204A through C as presented by the production committee.
Second.
No.
Because to get it on the floor, we can separate the question if we want it.
This is section 204. I did.
Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that sometimes just by following that procedure, getting something specific to talk to that can be amended, it could be, you can have a division of the question that perhaps we can kind of discipline the debate a bit.
One other thing for us all to remember is this, that this is not our last shot at it, and I don't think we can get down to nitpicking numbers unless it's vital to do so at this point. If there's a motion and a second to accept 204 as presented by the fire protection.
You're making an awful lot of noise.
Is there any
Right
discussion?
by the microphone. It's not, I'm halfway between.
Is there any discussion? Lisa?
Yeah, as we brought up last night, I still don't like the section in here that states that if someone becomes physically or mentally incapacitated, that he shall be removed from office. And, and then in B and in C.
It is embarrassing when the present assembly. And see.
I just find it hard for somebody to define what physically or mentally incapacitated is.
Jane?
I guess I would agree with Lisa in that the definition of whatever those terms are, that when somebody got in a car and broke his back and was laid up for months and then automatically be removed, and we have the option to resign or if someone. It's action by the assembly on one of its members.
What I'm thinking about, Jane, if I could speak to that briefly, the idea, as I see it anyway, Jane, is that the assembly would establish, down here in C, the reference to the assembly establishing standards and procedures for determining incapacity, and plus the reference to notice, public hearing, and judicial review in the case of removal would apply to any removal that followed from a finding of incapacity.
Okay, then
Mr. Chairman,
Sherry?
I would move to amend section 204 to delete B subsection 3 and to delete the phrase including standards and procedures for determining incapacity from subsection C.
Second.
Delete
To delete
3 from
B
B.
subsection 3 and C including standards and procedures for determining incapacity.
Mr. Chairman, I could speak to, and Sherry perhaps will too, and I did not take part in the discussion last night, but I think it does create some problem of defining what those are. I think the fact that we have under ordinance the ability of the assembly by ordinance to determine the existence of a vacancy, that should adequately take care of that problem.
Rick? Ms. Sturgis, I certainly
What do you
don't want to get into the merits of this discussion, but with reference to,
Huh? You acting up again, Mary?
Excuse me.
What about the mental incapacity of the
could we
charter
wait
committee?
until later on?
We're physically incapacitated.
Why are we making such a big thing of this physically and mentally incapacity? It's something that is normally a routine thing. Well, what is the big thing here?
Mary,
Come on.
could we leave that till later? Or we're reading a lot of
I've only got a couple
Ms. Arles, I just had one comment on your statement that the reference to determining vacancies by the assembly would cover the problem. I'm not sure that's true under this wording, because the way it's set up, we say the assembly seat becomes vacant upon 1, 2, and 3, death, resignation, and removal. And then we say removal may occur if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think under that form of language, there would be an implication that anything not listed would not be a basis for removal. And therefore, if it's not within the category of removal, it will not become a basis for a vacancy,
Mr. Chairman,
other than death or resignation.
Rick, I was looking at the area, and I'm wondering in the last charter if that was it, where you have just your attendance requirements. If that would not be adequate, obviously, you know, there might be a case of someone that was mentally unbalanced coming to assembly meetings, or and that perhaps would not be covered, but certainly by illness, and if they were to the point of certification, then they would not be able to keep up with what is now item 5.
Again, I suppose that your reference to mental illness is one possible example. Other possibilities that might come up, I guess we mentioned that were somebody who becomes deaf and dumb, or otherwise unable to function, but still able to be there.
I don't know. Sherry?
Mr. Chairman, I think that in thinking about this after last night, if you take the combination of the attendance requirements and the referendum and recall provisions that we'll put in the charter, whereby the people could replace their assembly person, and in looking at the model city charter, their section on filling what constitutes a vacancy does not speak to physical or mental incapacity. It does have the other 4 listed out, and in fact, I think the 71 charter came almost directly from the model city charter. So on that basis, I would support my motion. Comes as a great surprise to everyone.
Is there further discussion on the motion to amend
Yes.
by deleting section 3 of that portion of good standards and procedures determining capacity?
Following what Sherry is saying, then if you're going to take that approach where you're going to dilute what's up there, why not eliminate the whole thing and just use paragraph C, as we discussed the last time, which is all encompassing? I mean, if you're going to start hacking away at 1, 2, and 3, let's eliminate the whole works and go to 3, which in essence says exactly what you're trying to say without enumerating whether you're physically or mentally handicapped or you're a felony or whatnot.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
I think I feel that it's important to guide the Assembly in what they shall put in their ordinance. They shall put 1, 2, 3, and 4 in.
Well, if you're gonna do that, then what's wrong with putting in physically and mentally handicapped? It's just another category. I mean, why are we eliminating that?
Obviously, I had no major quarrel with it because it was in there in the beginning. But,
Well, then let's
but
do that.
I do think that it's not necessary, and I think the other 4 are necessary.
Why?
Why are they?
Gee, a guy that loses his mind is as bad as a felon. I mean,
Yes, but you see, Fred, in the case of a felon, the court has made a determination there. I think what we're quarreling about in the physical and mental incapacity is the difficulty in setting standards to determine when that exists.
I've had to defer to Dr. Parsons on that. He's more astute on that than I would be astute.
Mr.
How you
Chairman.
determine somebody's mental health.
It seems to me that there perhaps has been adequate discussion. It has to be a personal judgment. I think the first charter, as well as the model city charter, list the 4. I think it's appropriate to have those in. It's an important enough matter. And I think that we're perhaps at the point where we can either vote it up or down. I would call for a question.
Sure.
I would concur with Mr. Chai's comment that the shortened section C covers what is necessary. It says, including standards and procedures for determining incapacity, and will give enough guidance to anyone who presumably is in a public position to create an ordinance that would be adequate to cover the situation.
Is there any further discussion?
I would, if that's a substitute motion, I would second it.
I would move, Mr. Chairman, that a substitute motion that we have section C, and as last night, after the and in the next to last line, in cases of removal from office, provision of for notice, public hearing, and judicial review.
Just the last
Put
phrase is moved up.
That's how my minutes
You
here
read.
indicate that it's moved up instead of at the end of the sentence.
Would you read it as you?
The Assembly by ordinance shall provide for determining the existence of a vacancy, including standards and procedures for determining incapacity, and in cases of removal from office, provision for notice, public hearing, and judicial review.
Mr. Chairman, unless there's a division of the question, I would say that that is out of order. The motion on the floor was for the deletion of item 3 and for the rewording of item C, I believe.
I think, not being a parliamentarian, we have to rely on Marlis, and Marlis is parliamentarian for us, so if we should then go back to voting on the amendment, which is to delete 3 and that portion of C, including standards and procedures for determining incapacity. Changing 4 to 3 and 5 to 4.
Mr. Chairman, he could offer a substitute just for C, and then the item 3 stands. That's the only point I was trying to make, that we have both of those before us again. And you're amending just one section.
We'll get to it one way or another.
Question on the amendment.
Question's been called.
Question on the original amendment. First, this is out of order, we're talking about what Alice just described.
Yes. Question is on the amendment. Eliminating 3 and that portion of C, including standards and procedures for determining incapacity. Shuri?
Yes.
Jane?
No?
Lisa?
Yes.
Jim?
No.
Fred? No. Mary?
No?
Arliss?
Yes.
Myself, yes. 1, 2, 3,
4 and 4.
yes. 4 to nothing, so the motion is lost. 4 to 4.
Chairman,
Now,
I
the
would,
main motion was to adopt, so now, from there,
I would move that we delete all of sections A and B, and reword section C, so that after the word incapacity, and in cases of removal from office, provision for notice, public hearing, and judicial review, period.
I'll second that. It's moved and seconded to delete A and B, 204, and retain C as modified. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mary?
I think this is in keeping with our idea of trying to be, cover the field and not be wordy. I think it does leave provision for taking care of almost each one of those items listed above, and it certainly is a heck of a lot less wordy.
Mr. Chairman? Jim, I'd like to hear you speak to that. Again, there's this question of a home rule charter and giving a great deal of authority to the legislative body of what we should do. Do you feel there's something so very basic to people serving, so basic qualifications that perhaps it needs a statement in the charter? I too want a simple, concise one, but to me, particularly the question of having committed a felony, and some of these are just so basic to what we would expect of our legislative people that it almost seems that it needs to have some of that stated.
Chairman? Parsons?
If this is true, that it's so basic, then we should very definitely leave it for them to put in the ordinance, accept the fact that they will have sense enough to make that kind of decision.
Lisa?
I think that if somebody was convicted of a felony and the constituents felt that he shouldn't be there anymore, they would have him removed. And he can't come up for re-election because once you're convicted of a felony, your right to vote is taken away.
You're looking toward the recall position there.
Jury?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing that I find missing from this statement in reading it over is if they provide by ordinance for the existence of a vacancy, they could say that a seat shall become vacant upon death and resignation or removal from office. Do we need to say that they also need to spell out what constitutes, under what instances a person shall be removed from office? Does it say that?
It
says
says provide for determining the existence of.
Provide for determining when you have a vacancy, but what I'm not sure we do is say what creating a vacancy. I'm not explaining myself very well, but if the seat happens to be vacant, we've spoken to it because someone dies or resigns of his own volition. What we haven't spoken to is that they shall provide cases in which they shall remove someone
We
from
remove
office.
A and B. We haven't even mentioned that resignation.
Normally.
May I refer to Rick? Rick?
Well, Frank, I was just agreeing with Sherry as far as the meaning of the words is concerned. Normally, when you talk about a seat becoming vacant, you're talking about something that happens automatically by death or resignation of this sort. Then when you talk about, additionally, when you talk about removal for certain reasons, then you're talking about a procedure which has to be followed before the removal occurs and therefore vacancy.
Mr. Chairman, in the second half, you have alluded to it. You've said that you'll set up the provisions for dealing with it, but you haven't said that they'll outline the criteria for removal. And I think if we could get a phrase in there somewhere at the beginning of the sentence that says the Assembly shall establish criteria for removal. Rick?
I was thinking possibly of substituting the words removal from office for the words determining incapacity. If the Assembly is asked to determine, to provide for blah blah, including standards and procedures for removal from office, and in case of removal, provision for notice, public hearing, petition.
Would you read that one more thing?
Yeah, I'm not
Right.
happy with it, but the idea would be simply substituting the words removal from office or removal of an assemblyman from office for the words determining incapacity, because incapacity is a particular ground or could be for removal.
I would accept that. Are you all clear on what he's saying there?
No.
It would read, "The Assembly by ordinance shall provide for determining the existence of a vacancy, including standards and procedures for removal of an assemblyman from office, and in cases of removal from office, provision for notice, public hearing, and judicial review."
And in cases of
Removal from office, provision for notice, public hearing, and judicial review. Mr. Chairman, I would offer that as an amendment.
Second.
Sounds good.
We haven't, let's see, this is an amendment to an amendment.
actually, you do better
I
to substitute.
substitute, okay.
Substitute motion.
I lost where we were.
Could you reread that one
Yes.
more time?
It would
With
read,
feeling?
The Assembly, by ordinance, shall provide for determining the existence of a vacancy, including standards and procedures for removal of an assemblyman from office, and in the case or in cases of removal from office, provision for notice, public hearing, and judicial review, period.
You don't have to say in cases of
We
removal
can-
from office.
We can clean up the grammar,
Okay.
stylistically later. As long as the
Fred's
substance
right.
is correct.
Fred's right. Read it without that in cases of removal from
Yeah.
office, and you got the same thing.
Yeah, you have the same thing.
The implication, if you do that, it may be that you have to have a public hearing and judicial review in case of a vacancy by resignation.
Okay.
All right, the procedure, I guess, will be to,
Well, we got the main two, let's not nitpick it anymore.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
on the
I would accept that as my substitute motion if my second one would.
authorized, okay.
Too heartless in.
No, there's no problem. It's just moving along.
We'll move on the motion.
Hurry up, let's move on before Fisher gets here. Hurry up.
Move on the motion to change 204 to read, to drop A and B, and for C to read, the Assembly by ordinance shall provide for determining the existence of a vacancy, including standards and procedures for removal of an assemblyman from office, and in cases of removal from office, provision for notice, public hearing, and judicial review. Is there any further discussion?
Have we left out determining incapacity?
Yes. Yes.
Because that would be one of the provisions for removing them from office. The reason for that.
All those in favor? Those opposed? So ordered.
Hooray.
We got there. We got there.
Hey, we got through that one, huh?
Hey.
Too nice.
All right, goodness.
Now it's moved and passed. Is there any
Okay, what was last night?
Yeah.
Just needed our...
What I'd like to do is take a little time on the grammar and come back. Obviously we'll be looking at grammar later on everything.
Brent?
Well, we have a breather between questions. May I ask our secretary that she not use legal paper? It's in use.
Point of order. The
It's
secretary has not used legal size
May we
paper.
ask
That's
anyone
my
to
bugaboo.
material?
What you
Not
receive
every
on
fault.
legal size paper comes from other sources.
I
And you want
apologize.
Mr.
I
Brady
retract
or
that.
Rod for getting those
Mr.
things.
Chairman, may I give a
Exception
suggestion?
of the rough draft.
May I give a suggestion? Mr. Chide, if you will just take a pair of scissors and cut up here when you're at home tonight, it will fold up very nicely and fit
Well,
in your
here's
book.
what I do right here. See, I don't even use scissors.
All
See,
right.
it folds. But it's a nuisance. A fold that makes noise, and the mic picks it up.
Sherry?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to take this
Don't
point
write this, Margaret.
to thank our attorney for drafting up and having his secretary type and run off the Xerox copies of all these things that you have on legal size paper in order that we could proceed with our agenda.
All right.
Give me a
I'd
cookie,
like-
that's a at least I'm entitled to.
But don't get a swell head.
Take your time.
Okay, we don't have a breather anymore, so.
Let's do another one. Let's do another one. Jane, let's get another one.
I have a question. I'm wondering if it's possible to de-sex the charter.
I think
we have, yeah, we have the term assemblyman, and
Later
in
you
any
wanna ask.
situation where we refer to an elected official, we have used the male gender, and I'm curious if this group is interested in trying to de-sex that a little.
What do you mean?
I think that when we come to style, that'll all change, because this typist and his typist doesn't even.
Somewhere along the way, we did
What is-
using.
What is a woman with a deformed male?
Now I find, Mr. Chairman,
I
that
think
we're
we're
good
going
on
to send you
order,
home, boy.
and that we can discuss this at a time
Yep.
when we start polishing the style.
Okay, I'm just bringing it up there for everybody to think about it.
All right. Let's get something on the table on section 206, is it, sure?
205.
Let's go to that. Let's get that up.
Chairman, I move the adoption of section 205 as presented.
Moved, seconded. Who seconded that? Jim, sorry. That we adopt section 205, filling of vacancies, as presented by the Charter Production Committee.
Mr. Chairman, was there a discussion on this last night? And if, so I was going to ask maybe somebody to recap.
Lisa?
How come they're asking that the remaining members fill the appointment within 7 days?
I'm sure they did.
The last sentence.
Mr. Chairman, I think the reason is if you're at the point of losing the quorum, or the danger of losing the quorum, and that the necessity for filling is very obvious, so you can function as an operative body.
I can see giving them a deadline. I just wonder.
That they have extended the deadline if it's not at that kind of danger point, but we've seen it happen when too many people are gone. Isn't this the reason, Sherry?
Yes, I believe so, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Arlen?
we might point out too the 60 days in there. The other charter refers to 45 days, but we've just we talked with Mary Coffey, the borough clerk. There is presently an ordinance now before the assembly because of problems that they had with the withdrawal of the candidates and the printing of the ballots, to lengthen that whole period now to 60 days. So this really conforms, and the city is going to go along with that particular change.
Mr. Chairman, I have a feeling that we could get in that, if there's 60 days remaining, into that first sentence in a couple of words, if somebody looks at that carefully.
Meat-wise, so you don't object to the...
No, meat-wise, I don't object to it, but I think it could be gotten into that first sentence in such a manner that
Mr. Chairman,
Sherry?
as a matter of procedure, we are falling way behind on our schedule, and so if they're merely stylistic changes and not substantive changes, I would ask that we not.
it's not substantive. I'm just suggesting that maybe Rick can come up with getting that sentence if less than 60 days remain.
Mr. Chairman,
To phrase
Sherry
in that
has a
first
good point.
sentence.
Go.
Sherry makes a good point.
Call for questions.
Question is called for. There being no voices in opposition, the motion is passed. Section 205, filling vacancies, is adopted as presented by the Charter Production Committee.
Mr. Chairman, these numbers are stylistic numbers, or we'll change the numbers later?
Yes, the numbers are merely for reference at this point in discussion. I think we'll get too confused if we start changing the
I
numbers.
think we've got to consider everything now. It's going to be modified later.
Mr. Chairman, I would move adoption of section 206 as presented.
Second.
It's moved and seconded that adopt section 206 as presented. Mr. Gurnett?
I have a question whether the motion includes the bracketed material or not.
Rick, did you intend that to be left in parentheses or to be removed?
Well, I bracketed it to highlight it for the purpose of discussion as to whether it might be removed without damage to what the commission wants to do.
Well, I had intended that it would be left in parentheses, but, you know, that,
No, that was not my
That was not your
intention,
intention.
putting the brackets
Okay.
there.
okay, well, my motion did include all of that, and so we might move to
Mr.
amend
Stein?
if we wished.
Mr. Chairman, the items in the bracket is more procedural and mechanical, and I feel it doesn't belong in a charter. It serves no purpose. Talking about notifying the news media and all that are procedural functions which would be adopted within the assembly themselves.
Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, I move to amend 206A to read the mayor, the chairman of the assembly, or three of the assemblymen may call special meetings. The assembly shall adopt the rules and ordinance for setting up procedure of this.
That would be B, I believe, Lisa.
Deleting everything after that, did I understand it correctly? Deleting everything after may call special meetings,
Yeah.
Second.
moved and seconded. To amend, deleting everything in A after, that's in brackets.
Deleting after what?
At the brackets,
May call special meetings.
from here to here.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mary Coney?
I believe we've been wordy in this. I think that we should say that the assembly shall set up their procedures and that they will elect their presiding officer annually. And I think that's about all we need to say in here.
Mr. Chairman, the motion on the floor is to delete the
Delete.
That's right.
item
Lisa's
before.
motion.
I call for the question.
May we have,
May
may we have what we're voting on again? I'm not clear.
We're voting on deletion of all that in brackets in A, section A, 206. Now, I don't know.
I have no objection to that, Mr. Chairman. I was just suggesting we maybe
Once again, we had a motion
To delete.
this is a motion to delete from,
Right, and all it takes is a yes vote deletes those items in bracket, and then you have the whole rest of the motion before you.
I'll call for the question.
questions called for. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Chairman?
Mr. Parsons?
A question to Mrs. Holmes. Is there any reason that you list or three assemblymen may call special meetings?
Yes, I think it's important that you not allow just one assembly person to call a special meeting and inconvenience the body. I mean, if you had one or two assembly persons with a bug about something, I think.
Well, I feel the same way about three, is why I'm asking, from that direction.
I mean, you could
I think it's too
make-
few.
you
I
could
think
make
it's too,
four.
not enough.
I get sick of it.
I get the feeling that we're talking of an assembly of 11 or 9, something like this, and I consider this
harassment, actually, when you do it with this few people.
Would you,
Shy.
what would you propose?
I was merely going to pass an observation for Ms. Angevic's purpose, and that was chairman should be changed to chairperson and assemblyman to assembly person. Observation passed.
Is there further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, if Jim would like to try a number on, I'd be...
Do it
I don't know
number, Jim.
what the dimensions are. That's my problem. If we're dealing with 11, I think it should probably be 5. If we're dealing with 9, I still think it probably should be 4 or 5.
I think Mrs. Froney had a pretty good thought there, and the way she reworded that whole thing up there was...
I sort of feel that the assembly should set up its procedures, including chairman, and I think we could say it in fewer words. I think we're really setting up procedures in here,
Right.
still in the above.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's essential. I think that they should be, I think that we should perhaps indicate a few of them in the sentence, but not necessarily detail exactly how.
Mr. Chairman?
Arlen?
In some areas I've been really for cutting down, and others I think that we have to look to what the public expects, and I think that the legislative and administrative bodies are important enough that they perhaps take a little detailing. We're turning over everything to them, and at least we should know that they're have some minimum standards to which they must adhere.
I tend to agree, but I'm not, I think it can be done in less than that.
May I interpose for correct purposes? I believe that part that we've just deleted in the brackets. Basically, some portions of it should be there, or something similar should be there, perhaps less long, that states that there will be no special meeting without notice. I mean, period. Because this is one of the star session type things and the executive session type things that create problems.
Yeah.
Okay, it's in the interface, so I take it all back. Start over
Mr.
again.
Chairman?
Arliss?
Sherry?
Sure.
It's bad that they're starting to confuse us. I think it's time I stayed home all the time.
No, Arliss. I would speak in favor of the motion as it presently stands. I think that there are some very important things that we've set out here, such as votes shall be recorded, that there shall be a public record of all proceedings. And I would hesitate to make it too much more of a bare bones provision.
Didn't you say we were getting those things in another place? All about public meetings and notices and such
Jane?
like?
Mr. Chairman, present time, as I understand it, we're on the main motion, right? I'd like to move amendment in section B to read, the Assembly by ordinance shall determine its own rules and order of business, including provisions for maximum public, and adding those two words, deleting reasonable notice of regular and special meetings. Addition of the words maximum and public after 4, deletion of the word reasonable.
Public ever.
Notice.
No notice.
I don't like reasonable. That's,
Where did that go in after?
okay. It reads, including provisions for maximum public notice of regular and special meetings.
Can't go with the maximum.
What maximum would mean in that context? You could buy every page in the Anchorage Times and light up every marquee in town and still not have made maximum notice.
It really
Go
is.
with that.
Well, reasonable on the other hand.
Pretty reasonable. Well, I'm not telling you that.
Good,
Mr. Chairman,
good faith.
Rick, are there other legal words that might give more, such as adequate or
Why don't we just delete reasonable?
or just delete it and say provisions
notice.
for notice?
Okay, then you have the possibility of a half an hour's notice, which arguably is not reasonable. I think if you delete reasonable, you have less protection than if you leave reasonable in. If you put in adequate, that may be sufficient or adequate or whatever.
Mr.
Well,
Chairman,
my concern, we don't have a second answer.
reasonable is used in a proper context there. That's a very common usage. Everything has to stand a test of reasonability.
Mr. Chairman, present time,
Jane.
my concern is that by printing a notification in the Borough page is not reasonable to reach enough people about what the Assembly is up to. And what I'm looking for is, in the future, that the local government would spend more time thinking about what kind of uses of the media they would pursue in letting the public know what they're doing. Reasonable is a word that lawyers play with all the time, and I'm sure that it's fine for serving. I don't consider that what the Assembly does right now is reasonable in reaching people, in spite of the fact that legally I'm sure it is. What I'm trying to do is figure out some way to encourage that unit of government to reach out to the people. And I don't know what the proper words are, but I don't think reasonable is it.
Do you have any suggestions of wording at all, Rick?
Not really, Frank, that I think would really accomplish what Jane has in mind. I'm not sure what Jane has in mind can be done without spelling out the type of notice that you have in mind, because such words, even words like adequate and sufficient and good faith, and, it's all pretty
They're all good fairy tales.
flexible. Yeah.
We have a
A court would definitely apply. The word reasonable has some utility here because it's the kind of word that a court is used to applying to things like this. And a court would probably be pretty generous to the public, that is, in determining what was reasonableness, or whether an ordinance provision for notice was unreasonable.
we
Mr.
have-
Chairman, in speaking to that, you could also, to an assembly, for instance, you could maintain that it was not reasonable notice that you only do X number of things in order to attempt to get them to increase, what they're
Mr.
doing.
Chairman, did we ever have a second on
The whole motion.
No second. Is there a second to the amendment? If there's no second, it dies for lack of a second.
Mr. Chairman,
Jane?
I'd like to move another amendment that we include the word public notice after the word reasonable.
Second.
Reasonable
Public
public notice.
To add the word public.
Yeah.
Second. Oh,
It's Jim's second.
excuse me.
Is there any discussion on that
Question.
amendment? Question been called for. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none opposed, so ordered.
Question on the motion.
Question been called on the motion.
Chairman.
Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Parsons?
again, even if it's just, I think I would like to move to amend the 3 to 5,
Second.
section A.
Move to amend the 3 to 5 in section A. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mary?
when you call a special meeting, it is a meeting intended for doing business. I am not sure, unless it is a simple quorum that is required to call it, that you can be assured that you're going to have a quorum there. So I'm not sure but what the number should be made, the minimum quorum. Unless you know you've got a quorum to do some action, why call a meeting?
Sherry?
Mr. Chairman, I think that there's some validity in that because we've not yet set the number of people that we're going to have on the body. And that if we merely said, or a quorum of the assembly may call a special meeting.
I would withdraw my amendment if my second approves and reword it as quorum.
Mr. Gurnett?
I just have one comment on that, with reference to the need to have a quorum call a meeting in order to have business done. I do think that Section D has some reference to that, where it talks about a smaller number at a meeting, namely less than a quorum, can compel the presence of absent members. So you could have at least the possibility of a meeting called by 4 people, those people being empowered to compel enough extra people to make a quorum. I don't know, that's just a point in the word.
Good point.
I would accept that.
It's a good point.
So long as you can compel them.
You want to go back to 5 then? Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
But how do you do it? You get the policeman to go
The
get them?
legislature sends out the troopers then.
This is what happens in Juneau. We have been known to hide. So they could not find us.
in the days of the participatory press, I think we have got to allow Mark Smith to make a comment before she dies.
I've got to speak to this. Okay, so a quorum calls a meeting. Or maybe only the quorum is notified. Maybe only the 6 who have the particular actual crime, and the other 5 are excluded completely.
We have said it must be public notice. We must notify all somehow in here.
This is part of what we cut out. And what it did refer to notice of special meetings to the council, to the assemblymen themselves.
Oh, dear.
It says at least 8 hours notice shall be given to each member of special meetings. And possibly that's...
But we also say below that they'll... Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, for butting in. I promise not to do anything, but...
No, that's fine.
The city-borough split that we've had until the reapportionment, I could see this happening.
That's right.
And perhaps it may not happen in the new government because you may have a different part of, reapportionment scheme. But it could happen in the future.
Are you speaking to 5 or less?
I'm speaking to a forum particularly.
That,
They
you should have
you'd be
either quorum.
surprised how people can finagle things.
But how do you agree?
I don't have a suggestion. I think a reasonable number like 4 perhaps or 5.
If we're having 11, I think I'll stick with 5 at this point. I'm afraid that the quorum, as I think it through,
I agree with that.
Mr. Chairman, do we want to then put in that,
Provided all are noticed at least,
that all
provided all are noticed at least 8 hours in advance?
At least 8 hours in advance. We had
Is that
to
all
do
right?
that, but
Provided all are noticed at least 8 hours in advance.
Rick? Well, I was thinking, this is again trying to capture that idea in simpler, where we talk about the assembly shall provide its own rules, blah, blah, including provisions for reasonable notice of regular and special meetings. We have public notice. We could also say, and reasonable notice to the public and to assemblymen, or that idea, where we require that such a thing be done by ordinance.
That's a good idea.
That takes care of it.
including provisions for reasonable public and assembly notice?
Reasonable notice to the public and to all assemblymen.
Mr. Chairman, I think you have a motion floating around on the floor, but I'm not quite sure what it is.
It's moved to amend 3 to 5 in section 8.
And that,
Question.
Question's been called for on the motion to move from 3 to 5, the number in section A. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed?
Ms. Jones?
No,
Was that I'm not opposed to that.
no opposition, so ordered.
Okay, we're operating on the assumption that we're going to have 11. And to me, at least, it appears we talked in D about 6 and up here on 5. And I just want to clarify that. Is that what we're talking about?
If we were punched down,
Mr. Chairman, we have not yet made that determination. It would seem to me that if we make a different determination at that appropriate time, then we have to come back and make things in context.
Mr. Chairman,
Jane?
I move to amend section B to read, Assembly by ordinance shall determine in its own rules and order of business, including provisions for reasonable notice to the public and all assemblymen of regular and special meetings.
Second.
Assembly persons.
I caught your own trap.
Can be people,
Persons.
Oh,
bodies.
is there any further discussion on the amendment to B of 206, adding the words "to public and all assemblymen" between the words "reasonable" and "notice"?
No,
It's
between
all
notice and
notice.
After notice, all right.
Question?
Question's been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? So ordered.
Gee, I've lost my sex and it just doesn't seem...
Jane?
Where did it go? Along the same lines, I'd like to amend section A to read chairperson and
He's
assembly
muttering, he's
person.
crying.
Amend section A to...
Keep saying it doesn't matter.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
we're just in
All right.
Mr. Chairman, are we ready for a question on
Ready for
the...
a question on the main motion to
main
adopt
motion as
as amended? Section 206. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? So ordered.
Oh, I'm just making a flourish as I checked out the things.
Mr. Chairman, I move adoption of section 207 as submitted.
Moved and seconded to adopt section 207 as as it's submitted by the Charter Production Committee.
Oh,
Mr. Chairman,
Mary Pony?
my husband looked up the word municipal, and if the dictionary is right about the term of municipal, we can't use it there. We would have to define it more closely. Because it can practically mean anything other than federal government, I think.
Compensated employment with a municipality.
Well,
Yes.
I'm talking about the word municipal.
Just in my hip pocket.
I'll bring one next to it.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with the problem.
What,
Mr. Chairman, I would think that we could define the term, we've used the term municipal quite frequently in the charter, and I think it may bear definition in the definition section to indicate that it means employment of the anchorage.
This particular
Anchorage,
municipality.
as we decided.
All right, if we define it, then we're all right. But if we don't define it, because of the number of definitions he found for it, I think we
It
could
could
be
mean
in trouble.
juvenile.
We could be in trouble.
That's right.
Lisa?
Does somebody
Really
tell
know
me
what you're
why,
saying, maybe a juvenile employee.
Well,
Excuse me. I'm just kidding.
Lisa?
can somebody tell me why we should have in there that an independent contractor can be a competitive bidder? If he's an assembly person or an elected public official? The last sentence, how come it's there? I mean, I can see this being abused and somebody finding out what the bid is and being the lowest bidder.
An independent contractor engaged through competitive bidding is not a municipal employee for purposes of this section.
I don't think you understand the term independent contractor.
What,
She's saying it's coming.
I don't follow what,
Is your question that
you don't see why he's exempted.
Yeah.
Such a person, a provider of service, any kind of service, as long as it's competitively bid, and that person usually is excluded from voting on something he has an interest in. Right?
If I hear Lisa right, would he have information prior to the time the bids were let about what the bid, what the bid was going to be, and to be the low bidder, you know? I mean, they set what they think the bid should be and where it should, with what range it should come around, and he could just find that out. And, I think that, or knowing what the bids had been filed were, and then coming in as a low bidder.
They are not public, they're open to the
I
public.
would suspect that kind of thing would be handled in the area where we talk about conflict of interest. And to exclude anybody who's in any business that might be doing business with the borough from serving on the assembly would eliminate a hell of a lot of people from running for office. That's everybody from janitorial services to private consultants to office manager, people who own property. I think that it's really huge.
Sherry?
Mr. Chairman, Lisa, when they open a bid, they have sealed envelopes and everyone's bid comes in at one time and it's public, I mean, it's open in the presence of those people bidding all at once. And there is no lowest limit to the bidding. Someone can come in below what they expect the lowest figure to be. But I can see cases where you might wonder, but I think that those would be so few compared with the injustice you do to people.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think you have to take this in concert with a conflict of interest law, because obviously there would be cases where you could sit as an assembly person and have really specific knowledge. But there again, there are other things of identifying your interest and not participating in that. So
An assembly person wouldn't participate under those conditions. I mean, for
Jane?
something that,
yeah, it's conflict.
Jane?
I have a question. I'm moving on to another subject. So, when we talk about, is elected public office in the second line, is that out?
You know, I'm not sure why I have that in parentheses. I'm really not. I think for purposes of discussion, it should be treated as in.
Okay.
But as I recall the discussion on that, it was not entirely clear to me which categories the subcommittee wanted in and which they wanted out. So
Okay, as I recall the discussion, we talked about whether or not somebody who was in the legislature, the state legislature, could be an assembly.
Or school board on the assembly.
And I don't know that we've dealt with it yet. And I'd like to, because I think that, I don't think people who serve in the local government, such as on the school board, should be able to sit on the assembly. But I do think that somebody who runs for the legislature should be able to serve for the assembly.
Madam Mr. Chairman,
Mary Crony?
I greatly disagree with that because when the assembly sits as a field for adjustment, anybody that is not present, being in some other place, is an automatic no vote, and I don't think it's a justice to people.
Mr. Chairman,
Marlis?
could we take 1 second for you to tell me what that means when they say automatic no vote? I've never quite gotten that in my head. What do
Well,
you mean?
it is, Arliss.
No, but
All right,
just tell
I'll
me.
explain. If you've got 11 people present, all you have to have is 6 out of an 11. Any person that votes no is definitely a no, but anybody that is absent is also a no because they can't possibly be a yes.
That's in the rules of procedure with the board of
No, they just,
She's
just by lack of being present, they can't possibly be a yes. So you don't have that many chances out of 11 of getting 6.
This is for purposes of
Oh, Mr. Chairman, no, Mary's bringing this in, and I've heard this so many times, I see what she's saying. Actually, any time that an official body meets, and a person is not present, by being absent, you make it more difficult to achieve whatever.
But you're not recorded in your absence as having voted.
Oh,
You're not recorded as having
Correct.
voted no.
But
But
in
it is,
essence, it's the same thing that happened here last night. We had something that we thought went 5 to 2, but it actually went 6 to 2. But at 5 to 2, it did not pass. 6 to 2, it would have passed.
it's the lack of a yes.
Yeah.
And you have one less out of 11 chances of getting what's needed.
Did we set up the thing for?
Mr. Chairman, I'm interested in this particular dialogue. Other elected public office, I think probably should be in. From our experience as the town grows, we've seen it work
It happened for the
to
school
the
board,
disadvantage
for
of
Moran's.
boards. And we have had times,
Town.
longer time ago, when there were city councilmen in the state legislature, and it really becomes awkward. Although there were people who indicated they felt the city's purposes were being served by having a councilman in the legislature. I think we're big enough at this point where it is an appropriate kind of restriction on service.
Further discussion?
Is that a motion?
Or are we
We
just
have a
simply
motion.
There is a motion.
Yeah.
There is a motion.
But elected public office.
Now,
But doesn't
That-
it prohibit somebody that works within the school district as a secretary from running for an elected public office?
Where,
Yes, it does.
Yes, that's the whole point of it.
for a public office in which she would be controlling herself.
No, for any.
Oh,
In
municipal
assembly,
employment. It would bar her regardless. I mean, if she's a secretary in the school system, she could not hold
Be an
office.
assemblyman.
That's right, she cannot be an assembly person.
Jane?
Would that mean that Mary could not have run for the charter commission?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
right.
It definitely would.
That's right.
It definitely would.
Okay.
and it would mean that if Cliff Hartman wanted to run for assemblyman, he would have had to resign from his job with the school.
Which
Do they have to
If
resign
you were
before
elected.
they run or after they get elected?
Have to get elected.
Wait a minute.
After they're elected.
Well, when I ran for state legislature, I handed in my resignation,
yeah,
same as I filed,
yeah.
and
Ed Willis
But you can't
didn't
serve-
resign from the assembly until he
It's actually,
was ready to take oaths for office rather than when he filed.
Mr. Chairman, I think it very clearly goes on to state for the term for which he's elected, hold any other, so it would only happen at the time that
Correct.
the election perhaps is certified or...
But you can't serve two masters. It just doesn't work.
Chairman, I would call for the question.
can we copyright that?
Yeah. Put it to music and I think
call
it
for,
A new town?
right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Okay.
Is it reading any other elected public office?
Yes.
One suggestion of a person handling the language, an independent contract of things hanging a little rough, you might clean the language.
Yeah, they're not,
Yeah, there's not continuity
no
there.
opposition, the motion passed.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, I'm still not completely comfortable with any other elected public office. For example, well, maybe it's all right. If we should have a constitutional convention, for example.
That, I would think, would be an exception, all right.
You know, that is an exception written into the state constitution, I believe. The similar prohibition in the state constitution accepts constitutional conventions. So it's covered.
All right. then
No,
we
I'm saying
better
it's not.
say except constitutional convention.
Mr. Chairman, I move to reconsider 207.
Second. Don't you read second?
Then second.
Oh, wait a minute, excuse me.
Who seconded?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman,
Harless.
okay, since I made that, it states except where authorized by ordinance. Do you think that's adequate?
we put that in order to accept cases like this, where there would be a special instance coming up. The example given is a regional advisory
Yeah.
thing set up, or
Like the Cook-
constitutional convention. I would think that it would be
Where do you have that?
very
First
close.
sentence, first sentence, first sentence.
5 words.
That covers it.
We
You're right.
talked, for instance, like the Cook Inlet Air Quality
Do you
Board,
both
if
wish
that
to
were,
withdraw your reconsideration?
No, we think I should.
that was in haste.
Thank you.
I
Okay.
think that takes care of it.
Motion for reconsideration was withdrawn.
Mr. Chairman, I move adoption of Section 208 as submitted.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we adopt Section 208 as submitted by the Charter Discussion. Is there any discussion?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I take it the options are that the clerk could serve at the pleasure of the executive.
If it were the other way.
Yeah.
Right, right. Well, that has to be.
Is
Call
there
for the
no,
question.
any further
Question.
discussion?
I have a question.
Jane?
Yeah, did we deal someplace else with any other advisors that the assembly,
Attorney
any other
or-
staff, that the assembly made?
Mr. Chairman?
I remember the discussion, but I don't.
Jane, we had a great deal of discussion on that, and as I recall, the reason by not stating it, it is still possible for the assembly to exercise that. And very frankly, at least some of us felt that we do not wish to think in terms of their kind of a policy decision that go out and hire all these people, because we could see a possible duplication of office. Again, if we should go the council manager form, this area, this would need correction. We've made just a basic assumption for a working tool.
Mr. Chairman,
Mary Froney?
if you'll read that sentence under clerk, it says that they shall appoint a municipal clerk and staff and prescribe their duties. The clerk's office, if it is like the borough, the clerk's office is the assembly's, and any staff duties that they wish to assign to anybody in the clerk's office is the duties they have. Now, it doesn't mean that they couldn't be staff in relation to planning, they could be staff in relation to public works, they could be staff in relation to anything else they wish to, if that office is their office, as is described here.
Chairman?
Mr. Parsons?
This is an interesting point Mrs. Cronin brings up. The staff doesn't mean with the municipal clerk.
It doesn't mean the clerk staff, it
That
does
was
not
our
say the clerk
intention.
staff.
That is our
This
Wait.
doesn't say the clerk staff, it just says and staff. It doesn't say and clerk staff and provide their duties. It
Yeah,
says
I would
clerk
hope the
and
assembly
staff.
did not appoint the clerk's staff, but I would hope that this allows the assembly to appoint a staff.
Mr. Chairman,
If staff.
I believe that it had been the intention, that's okay. I believe it was the intention of the subcommittee that staff would modify municipal clerk, and that we asked, as I recall, if presently the assembly did not appoint the staff, and they do, as I understand.
They do not. The only ones they appoint are the clerk and the assistant clerk,
Deputy clerk.
and deputy clerk, and we set up the ombudsman's office, and it is under the clerk's office, and that is the staff that we have, and we have appointed. The secretaries in the clerk's office are hired under civil service, the same as other employees in the borough. The only two that are directly hired by the assembly are the clerk, the assistant clerk, the ombudsman, and the ombudsman's assistant, I believe, is even hired civil service-wise.
And of course, could you use and provide a staff? So appoint a municipal clerk and provide a staff.
Mr. Chairman, I'm
I'm glad I raised the question.
Well, I
I'm
am.
less clear than before. Something's got to be done.
Mr. Chairman?
Well, no, I was thinking about, I would think that the wording is taken pretty closely from the 71 version. I do think the word staff there was meant to apply to mean the clerk's staff as opposed to staff in general. And possibly, as Mary says, you don't want the assembly appointing all the staff in the clerk's office. The word staff could be struck with the idea that the clerk would have inherent authority from some source to hire its
Same
secretaries.
as an attorney would, if they're an attorney's office.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, I would offer an amendment that it be reworded to strike there, substituting the, and to insert of that office following duties. And if I have a second, I'll speak to my motion.
Are you going to strike staff?
No.
Seconded for purposes.
This brings us back to the wording in the 71 charter, and I think where we've gotten into our difficulty is that there was not a clear reference. I think that saying prescribe the duties of that office clearly indicates, therefore, that the staff is the staff of the clerk. And it does not say that the assembly shall appoint all staff, but this leaves it up to the assembly to decide that it shall appoint, say, the deputy clerk. Or if there are two deputy clerks, the assembly can appoint the two deputy clerks. And then say later that the clerk shall appoint other staff. Delegate that authority.
Sherry, would you mind reading that for the record again?
It would read, the assembly shall appoint a municipal clerk and staff and prescribe the duties of that office.
Chairman?
Mr. Parsons?
I would have to speak against that amendment. Largely on the basis that I feel that the assembly should not get into the business of hiring staff beyond the principles of that office. And this gets into a kind of hire that we got into in the legislature in terms of legislative employees kind of thing. And it becomes a kind of patronage thing that I would like to see us avoid in the municipal charter if we could.
Marlis?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move to delete the words "and staff."
Second.
Mr. Chairman?
We have a motion, I think, to amend on the floor now.
We can have two amendments, can we not?
You're the
All right.
You're going to have
Two amendments. No, that's great.
You have an amendment to the second degree. An amendment to the second degree. That's right.
amend. We have a motion to amend
Rick, sit there and smile.
by eliminating the words and staff.
I just think you could have an amendment to amendment. I didn't know you could have two amendments on the floor.
Yes, you can, most assuredly. Mr. Chairman, by deleting the "and staff," we're definitely, I think the important thing is that the assembly has the right to appoint the clerk. They also have the right to appoint staff, other clerks, etc. But we specifically need to talk to this one. And I think we're then spelling out that they shall set the duties of that office if we act on both amendments, and I think that cleans it up.
Mr. Chairman, I would support that.
It takes
Doesn't hear your problem.
It takes care of that problem. If they want to have staff separately elsewhere,
It's not been said they can't anymore, so
Right.
they
No,
can.
they're two separate ones.
Is there any further discussion on the motion to amend by eliminating the words and staff?
Question?
Question been called for. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? So ordered. We now have on the floor the motion to amend
Question.
Question is called for. The wording as amended. All those in favor? Those opposed? So ordered.
Hooray!
208, adopt.
Mr. Chairman, I would like the opinion of the commission as to whether they wish to defer still discussion of the ombudsman or whether they wish to consider it at this time.
Mr.
Jane?
Chairman,
Harlan?
what had we? We had, I thought, made a recommendation, and I even put down a note here that Joe, who's in the audience, agrees. And so I wonder why we have not yet determined.
What, Mr.
Well,
Chairman?
no, our charter production.
Sherry?
I believe where we stood after the last time was that we had discussed leaving in A, there is established in the legislative branch of the municipality the Office of Ombudsman. And there was a lot of discussion, and Joe and a few others definitely wanted to prescribe everything. And we sort of thought that we would wait and see what kind of government we had before deciding whether
I
we
think
have an
that would
ombudsman.
make sense.
Was that where we were?
Okay.
I think that
Okay,
makes
in
sense.
that case, I think it would be appropriate to hold off still.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think we should.
With a note to our secretary to remind us.
Only Jane think it was easier to write the charter.
Jane?
At what point will we be talking about the form of government?
Now.
Now.
Right now.
Right now. This very minute.
Earlier we said later, well, later is not.
Here we are at later, and since, Mr. Chairman, since the Charter Production Committee has nothing for the commission on this point except these two sheets from the survey, I would hand the floor back to the chairman to conduct this.
Mr. Chairman, in other words, we're not going to take your irons out of the fire. You got to do it yourself.
But you had the floor.
The executive branch of the
Yeah, like the Holy Ghost.
201 and 202. Composition and powers, the assembly composition and powers. Section 202, term membership and qualifications. 201 reads, all legislative powers of the municipality shall be vested in the assembly. The assembly shall consist of 11 members elected from 11 assembly election districts. I have a little fat note on the side that says 4. And that's about as far as I've gotten in my district.
Mr. Chairman,
Mary Connor.
Lisa did quite a bit of homework, and I think it's proper that she pass out the homework she did at this time for the scrutiny of the whole group. I think it is a very definitive piece of homework, and I think it has implications upon that statement you just made.
I'd like to talk.
Well,
Oh, it's good. If you want to. Would you wait till I find it? Oh, I passed it that way. That's what it is.
She's got it.
First page just pretty much got over what the Longo survey did. And then the other one, what it did was I took the election returns that the borough clerk certified, and I broke them down into as many subsections as I could. And first thing I did was I took as the state has apportioned Anchorage, which is into the 6 districts, and I put how each precinct voted for the mayor, the executive type, the legislative body, and unification. And then I
tallied them up. And then, after tallying them all up, every district, all of the 6 districts came out in favor of the single-member districts. And then I took and I divided it up into the multi-member districts as it's set up right now to see how each district voted that way. And I did
What's that?
and again, it was with the present apportionment plan that stands right now, each district votes in favor of unification, and that was really quite amazing in favor of single member districts. And it was really quite something out in District 4, which includes portions of Muldoon, part of Geneva Woods, Sand Lake, Hillside, Girdwood Indians. They voted 1,800 for single member, and the next closest one was the multi with 894. And then I took it just city, borough, and total them. Each time there, single member districts won out, and then I further broke it down into individual precincts, and breaking it down into individual precincts. Out of 75 precincts, 60 precincts voted in favor of single member districts, 6 voted in favor of at-large, and 1 in favor of multi. Those were the top vote getters, you know. And then there were 8 precincts that had 2 ties top vote getter, and in those 8 precincts, single member districts were involved. And so that's kind of the way that I figured all this out, to see how, you know, to just take the apportionment plans as they stand now with the state and the local, and then by precinct and overall to see how people felt. And it was interesting to see that unification was complete in Indian.
How many votes?
Yeah, well, Mr. Chairman, on the basis of Lisa's work, it looks like there's strong feelings in favor of single-member district, and the one that we've got to hammer away at is whether we've got a mayor or a council form of government.
Mr. Chairman, I think we have more than that. I'm going to support somewhere along the line at this point in time multi-member districts. I'm well cognizant of all of the information and what it shows. But we have, I think, to think about the question of apportionment, which is the actual drawing of lines. We've set ourselves a very ambitious timetable here. And if we get into the question of apportionment, I think of actually changing those districts from where people come, we're going to add a tremendous, really, dimension to our job. Joel's here, and he's here, I'm sure, in interest in perhaps this and other things. But it is a very complicated process. I personally feel if we get into that whole issue shortly after having gone through kind of a nasty issue in the community, including lawsuits and all the rest, introduce that as an element for into the charter, that we might find that we have some serious problems. I feel that the community is just barely getting used to the idea of one approach then to radically change that, we're going to find trouble. I think it's a middle ground that we seem to have indications from the people that spoke that those that strongly favored at large, well, they probably could live with districts. The people that are single member, well, we like those, but we think we could live with them. And I think it's an area, personally, and I don't, maybe compromise is a dirty word to some. To me, it's a positive way of moving to the goal that at least I'm here for, and that is to achieve unification. There are methods whereby the body can reapportion itself. I think that after these hurdles are taken care of, it's time to move on. We've had a lot of problems in that we've had districting and redistricting for the House, and I've heard so many indications of just bitterness and turning off on the part of voters because there has been a lack of stability and in who they're voting for. And when I was running for the charter, this issue just constantly came up as to who runs from where and who is my assemblyman. And I think to change it now really bothers me. So I think we have to talk about both.
Fred?
If we were to go to, I'm not clear on this, if we were to go to single-member districts, how many districts are we talking about?
Maybe 4. Oh,
Single-member districts,
How many districts are we?
Carson, are you only going to have 4 of them?
9 or 11.
yeah.
Or 15 or
So in essence, really from a practical viewpoint, you would be creating a multi-district, even if you went to single-member, because you're going to have to bunch in a bunch of districts, so you're going to have a hell of a lot of people
What are you talking about?
on a single-member district.
On a single-member district, each single member in this borough would represent as many, or in Juneau borough altogether. Each individual assemblyman would represent as many people as are in the Juneau borough altogether. You're not giving them too much representation.
Lisa?
Huh? I'm still not.
Lisa?
If there were 11.
We spent a lot of money to have that survey done, and we spent considerable time before they went out into the field working on these questions of what type of executive we're going to have and what type of representation do you want, what the legislative body to be representing. So now we're going to,
We'll have to go
the
back
people
and
in the
change
survey,
the preamble.
the people in the survey said they wanted, single-member districts. So we're going to ignore, what the people are saying and say, well, sorry, we're going to, we don't want to explain to you that this is the way the map would be set up and this is how you would be represented. And you wouldn't have to worry about calling your assemblyman and getting turned away because he doesn't care what you problem is, the person would have more of an impact in his local government if he knew who his assemblyman was. And if that assemblyman had to go around and knock on doors and say, come out and vote for me.
Jim?
Chairman, I like to use statistics.
This is
Better
fact,
than, wait a minute. It's better than the next person. My whole professional training, to some degree, revolves around the use and manipulation and interpretation of statistics. And as one of the professors says, that some people use statistics more for support than for illumination, like a drunk on a lamppost. And I am not about to give up my independent good judgment, what I hear Arliss saying too. Whatever the statistics say, I still want something that's going to work.
Mr. Chairman?
Just a minute, I'll make this statement and I'm going to finish it. And to the extent that I was elected to this body, I spent money too to get elected to this body. And I'm not going to give up my independent judgment of what is a good philosophy of sound government to any statistic. Regardless of what it says, I am going to be bound by what my head tells me will work.
period. Now, if anyone can convince me that something else will work other than what's in my head, I'll go. Now, on that basis, I'm open for any kind of discussion about any kind of representation.
Mr. Chairman,
All right?
your argument against showing a map is that somebody is going to decide that they want to be on the opposite side of the line. I think that at the choice that they could have at the same time they choose, they can have the choice of a couple, at least, maps that they can choose from, vote for which map they wanted. I agree with Lisa that they have said what they want. Now, if we expect it to be a more responsive to the public rather than more responsive to the elite, which we are now claiming to be, it seems, then we're going to have to listen to the public when they make their voice. If we're not going to listen to the public, then we better take out of our preamble that we're going to expect to be more responsive to the people, because it won't be, because we will have ignored it in this hall right here and claimed we are elite and we know better than the folks that have told us. If we believe that the Rowan group got a reasonable sampling, it also told us that they wanted single-member districts. And I cannot understand why we are claiming to be the elite that knows better what the people want than what they have said.
Sherry had a call. Sherry?
Chairman, I wonder if it would be appropriate at this point to ask the Rowan group to do a phone back and ask just for an either-or choice. We've given people 7 choices. I'm not sure that in this huge, voluminous survey that it wasn't just the easiest thing to say single-member districts. I know what that means, and I would like to be very certain that people understand the choices, and I would perhaps favor a phone back which said single-member or multi-member. Period.
Lisa?
The people had choice on the ballot, and they had the ballot in front of them that said, what these were. And, the at-large received more votes than multi-member districts did. People must not be used to their, if they're used to them, they must not like them. If they aren't, if they're used to the concept of the multi-member districts, they must not like the whole idea behind multi-member districts if they vote in favor of the same member.
To respond to a question sort of that wasn't answered for Jim, I don't know whether you had discussion the other night, but it seems to me there are a couple of issues. There's composition of the assembly, which is the number, and then how they're composed, how they're elected. Then your actual reapportionment or your map is a separate issue. The former charter, its actual, as I understand it, the drawing of lines, and the former charter carried with it, a map of the districts, and it really carried out the apportionment and showed the area that, carried out the composition, and showed where those people were elected from. And if we are to go again to reapportion at this time, then it will mean carrying a new map. I can't quite agree with what Mary said when she talked about we could have a couple of choices. We're going to have to be able to set the lines on a map, either to accept those and so state in the charter, or we're going to have to create new ones so that when the people are elected, that they would be elected from a specific, in a specific manner.
I agree. I said we could make 2 maps with 2 proportionments that would divide it up into 11 districts, but they would be 11 different districts. 2 sets of 11 districts. they would have different lines.
Oh,
They could have two choices. They could choose one or the other.
To be on the ballot.
They'd have two on the ballot. This would be the only item that we would give them any choice on the ballot, with which they want. They have said they want 11-man districts, but give them two choices of 11-man districts so that they could choose one or the other. Whichever one came out ahead would be the district. I'm aware of the law's requirement that you have to vote on a map to get apportionment under any scheme for local government. I am quite aware of that, and I'm quite aware of the argument that so long as you put any map on, it may be the map that defeats you. But I think that if you give them two choices and try not to make them, intentionally try not to make them absolutely identical.
Jane?
Yeah, am I correct in hearing you, Arliss, that your concern is the electability of the charter should we choose to draw lines that would reapportion the representative body?
Mr. Chairman, James, without going too far, I think that
Is that your primary?
No, very basically, I am supportive of multi-member districts, and the appropriate time would speak on those. I do not favor the single-member district. I personally feel that the public receives and will receive good government under the multi-member district, and that it avoids some very serious problems that I see with the single-member district.
If that, my concern was that if we opted to go for multi-member on the basis that it would sell the charter each year, that's not healthy rationalization in my mind. I'm personally feeling that the statistical evidence, as limited as it may be, because we don't even have the analysis of what the Rome folks say this is, and
That's
the
right.
turnout,
In comments and so on.
at the last election was small. My reaction so far is though that the people, limited as it may be, who have indicated one way or another what their preference is, has been in favor of single-member districts. And I realize the kind of political hay you get into when you start drawing lines on a map, and lived through the last reapportionment in this community where we ended up with multi-districts. And I'm wondering if there's any procedure whereby we could say it's going to be some combination of maybe a single member and at large, and set up a separate commission or group or body to draw lines. So that we say the government will look like this, where we've got, and my preference is a single member with at large. And this commission has to draw lines so that we don't have to draw lines. Is that possible? Is that, and that the charter calls for reapportionment, and that be dealt with
Prior to filling the office?
This is my question. You're talking about a new reapportionment after the vote on unification or before? Yeah, I think we did discuss the possibility of the charter saying that the first election would be under the present system, but as of a certain fixed time thereafter, there would be reapportionment to certain specifications. I think that is possible.
In a transition section.
Well, yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
that means we get out of
when-
drawing lines, because I know how complicated it is and how many variations on the thing you can get into.
When will we have the results of this poll that's going on right now?
This week, my understanding is that it'll be done at the end of the week.
The end of this week?
Tomorrow, that is.
Irene told me today next week, as I understood it.
Oh, really?
I don't know.
Lisa, you had,
Throughout our meetings, people have always brought up that we need public opinion and that, there's not just input. It would seem that if we didn't take the input that we've gotten
Well, hey,
and use it, then
we certainly have,
We'll certainly lose credibility.
we've worked, Mr. Chairman, we've worked ourselves into a box here. I mean, we've talked about, we're going to be responsive and we're going to listen to the public, and I've got strong feelings about districting myself, but yet I don't think it's proper at this time to express it, because I think we ought to look at what the result of the survey is. If there's a doubt, I've even thought, discussed it with the chairman, of possibly having a newspaper conduct another survey just on top of it for these two questions, such as Sherry had mentioned, just as a backup position on it. But I think we may be premature tonight in trying to discuss this any further, really.
Sherry?
Mr. Chairman, I would say at this point, the statistical evidence that we have indicates single-member districts. I'm personally uncomfortable with this. I personally support the multi-member district concept. However, I think that we might be in a lot of hot water if we tried to say, well, guys, we know that the newspaper poll said this, and we know that the public opinion survey that we think said this, but what I would propose that we do is that in our first draft, we put in single-member districts, and that we follow up this survey with some more community sounding to see if the reading that we've gotten is indeed a true reading of the community, and that we leave in our minds and in the minutes the thought that it is just a first draft writing of what the sentiment we've tested to date is, and not definitely the way the charter will go.
Mr. Chairman,
Arliss?
I would hope when we get into these issues, and it probably is going to be possible, but for one thing, we could have the whole body on hand. I think it's just that terribly important on the basic issues of the form of executive and legislative body or city council, manager forum, whatever we have, and the two crucial issues that I really see. But the public speaks. There's also, and you have very good evidence of this so far, at least limited evidence of it. Sometimes from a position of, they have a point of view where they have not really been exposed yet to both sides and some of the intricacies of it. I think that the Charter Commission, when they have a position, needs to go out to inform. There's a lot of people that like the idea, for instance, of a single-member district, but on the one hand, we say people should participate in their government, and by a single-member district where they're able to vote once every 3 years, they're really participating on a much less active scale than the person that votes every year. I'm desperately concerned in things I read, whether it's U.S. World News and Report, Time, any of the national magazines, that the trend throughout the country, when we've had single man, single vote for some years now, and it's breaking down into, quote, bringing the government closer to the people, people are staying away in droves. Only a minor percentage, really, in Alaska is lower than the national averages, are being involved in their government. And for us to take away that almost, there are those of us that go every year and vote, but to take away the ability of someone to exercise some reaction or action within that government every year, I find very, very difficult. And it's a trade-off to, you know, Mary's concern and Lisa's concern of kind of having that assembly person next door, the assembly person that can get elected because they're from a small area. And I want to hear and have people's input, but I also want a government that's going to encourage the people to go out to polls, and I really have problems with the single-member district.
Mr. Chairman, I want to mention something in relation to that. I see no reason why the fact that you go to the polls, if you're going to have a council manager form for the school district, why they can't be coming up so that they'll be on election on the years when there's not somebody in there. And you're going to elect somebody, even if it's at large, that has to do with the spending of your tax money. It may not be directly on the assembly every time, but it would be participating in the government. And I know that many people do not feel like our list does, that it's essential to vote on their assemblyman every year. I think that if we do any further taking of the poll, that we need to give them some statistics as to how much it costs for advertising in relation to running for election. I know that for one thing, in the multiple man district, I couldn't afford to advertise. I would have to go out and solicit money, which is against my grain, because there's a tendency when you go out and solicit money that then you owe some votes. And I don't want to have more of that sort of representation in the borough.
Lisa?
I'm just wondering that, you know, with people, most elections now are run through the media, and they hear this person in the media giving this pitch to the public, you know, and it's all been all put together and it's all spiced up. Why should they go out and vote if they don't know the person? They don't care. They don't understand what's going on. Why should they go vote? And, you know, a lot of people take that attitude. They don't understand what the government's doing. And they don't know that, you know, they don't know who this guy is or if he's going to do a good job or not.
Mr. Chairman, I think the commission should confine itself to the merits of representation and stay away from how much it costs to be elected to office and the means and whatnot. It's incidental, it has nothing to do with representation. I mean,
It does. It
someone
means
can
that
get
you're-
elected if they're very popular with an absence of money, and others have to have money. But that's a democratic process of election, and I think it has no bearing on representation.
It does, because it keeps that many from being,
It's incidental
having a
to it.
chance to participate.
Incidental to it.
Mr. Chairman, I've just been doing a little bit of calculating here, and statistically, I think we're going to have to get some input from the Rowan Group on this, but you can look at this a different way. There were 104 people who favored single-member districts, and there were 151 people who preferred a different form of districting. Now, it might not be possible for us to decide whether those 151 people would vote against the single-member district if presented with the single-member district, or whether some of them would side with the single-member district and some of them would not.
How did you get your addition? Would you please explain what you added to get that sort of a
I
figure?
will be glad to, Mary. We have 104 under Category 1, and we have 151 in Categories 2 through 7. Now, let me explain why I use that. Category 2 calls for single-member districts at large. It's difficult for us to say whether the people were voting for that because of the single member or because of the at-large feature. Presumably, if they were more in favor of the single member, they would have voted in number 1. presumably they like the at-large feature of it better. And that's why they voted 2 instead
I
of
could
1.
by just as good argument, I could go the other way.
Let her finish. It's an acceptable presumption. It's an acceptable presumption.
The same thing with number 3. If it had been the single-member district that they wanted mostly, they would have voted for the single-member district. So obviously there was a feature in that was more appealing to them. In other words, it took something away from the single-memberness as the only concept. Now the multi-person and the at-large persons, that's self-explanatory. And then you have the single-member district plus at-large. Now that was a fairly large category. And I think what I interpret from that was those people are saying to me, I like the idea of single-member districts, but it bothers me to have everyone representing just a special interest. I want a broader community interest somewhere on my body.
Right on, You want the right person says it too.
Mr. Chairman, Mary, I still have the floor.
Go ahead.
No.
If I can stop giggling and blushing. The thing that I see the community saying here is single-member districts is appealing to us, but we don't like it without qualification. And this is where I think we've heard in our public hearings and in people that I've talked to around the community, gee, I'd be willing to compromise on the multi-member district because I see that as a way of getting some of the single-personness and some of the at-large features. I think that represents my reading of this and the numbers, and I surrender the floor.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say that I can add 2, and by adding all of those that have single in it, I come up with 171 to 90 possibly. By just as adequate reasoning, and that if you're going to go that route, you must accept 171 to 90 just as well. Now, if you're going for the business of allowing them to have some single-memberness, I haven't found very many of my folks that did not tell me that the multiple-member district was just a smaller at-large, and that it was definitely compromised. And the smaller at-large was enough at-large that I could not do the door-to-door sort of thing, which you can in a single-man district. To suggest that it should be between single-member and multiple-member, when multiple-member is only one of the at-large things, I don't think that you have chosen the 2. I think that if you're going to go to a true compromise, it might be the single-member districts, 9 of them, with 2 at-large. But then if you have the single-member district with 2 at-large, your mayor's going to be at-large, that would give you somebody to vote on every year.
Mr. Chairman.
Jim?
It could also be done with 1 mayor and 1 person at large, and you vote on somebody every year. But I can't accept your argument
Mr. Chairman,
in the least. Certainly can't.
I think every one of these arguments is interesting. And I repeat my point of view that I'm willing to be sold. Now, I sense that there's people with a real soapbox that they're on tonight. And if I felt as strongly, I would be every bit as vehement about it. I don't. I'm willing to be sold. I'm willing to interpret these figures every way possible to interpret them. I want to preserve some sense of community in whatever we come up with. I don't like the idea of, on the first draft, going with single-member districts, but I'm willing to do that on the first draft as a point of departure kind of thing.
I think there are other ways of interpreting and have been interpreted. I think these are both legitimate propositions that have been put upon us as to interpreting the figures. One must also accept the fact that whichever one is listed first gets more votes by the very fact it's listed first. That is why each ballot in an equitably put ballot has the alphabetical names rotated on a drum so that they are voted on in different precincts first, so that nobody has the advantage of being first on a ballot. So there's a number of factors that you can put into the thing and come out with different kinds of interpretations. And I just want to do what's best.
Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, on the breakdown within the precincts, if it says like that the mayor won in 66 out of 75 precincts, that means, the mayor maybe got one more vote than the next, the mayor manager full time. But that's still a majority of
Jane?
Mr. Chairman, have we got a meeting scheduled with your own group for their interpretation of this?
Have no meeting.
Yes, we do. Next Friday noon.
Next Friday?
When? Next Friday noon?
That
That's the
sounded,
one that's set up with Mr. Rowan, and he explained to me that it would be a presentation, I don't know, a total presentation, but he said it would include a presentation of what was learned in the survey and what he, and his presentation to each of you to give you an idea of how you can go about selling
Do
in terms of public information.
I really think that would be much better on Thursday night. I think that's going to be a long discussion and should take precedence over whatever else is on the
I
agenda.
didn't have to do with setting that up, except in that it was a time that Mr. Rowan said he could come. I can check and see if there's another time he can come.
I think if he's available Friday noon, he could probably be available Thursday night. Thursday night is a regularly scheduled meeting time and would be more appropriate for maybe all commissioners to be present.
Mr. Chairman?
And during the day.
Excuse me. I think I know where you're going. I make a motion that we consider two items. The item of the composition and the form of government at a regular meeting, after we have had an opportunity to hear a presentation by the Rowan Group on the results of the survey.
There's a second?
In all fairness, I did tell him that you were holding off on certain sections, awaiting his information.
Mr. Chairman, that would be that, the possibility if we got through all of that and people felt comfortable that we might be able to discuss that next Thursday night or at the next regular meeting after that. But I really think that you've heard some discussion tonight to get started on. I think it's very basic, the two things we have before us. I'd like to have all the information come to us that can, and, a lot of thought and soul searching in it, and then however she goes, that's the way it's going to be.
Mr. Scott?
Kind of agree with Alice. I think if a vote were taken at this table right now, it'd be multi-person from just listening to everybody. And I think we may be,
Kind of different than I do that.
we may be, if you look around the table, I think you'd hit a multi-person vote right now. And I think we ought to keep an open mind. As I say, we're in a box. We've got to keep an open mind until we see the balance of the surveys. Is there any chance of, didn't I see a preliminary of this survey? What did you show me last night?
what you got, you
Is
had.
this what we're going to see Friday? I mean, it's pretty
Okay,
much...
Friday, sure.
Huh?
Sure. This right here is in addition to what she had. There were 5 that had other choices, there were 5 that had no preference, and there were 5 that didn't know. And that's the total.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion to the motion?
Question. Oh,
I just want that to happen next Thursday night. I want to specify that.
Mr. Chairman,
Debbie?
may I specify instead that it be both of it, and Mr. Rowan can make it, number one, and when we are assured that the entire commission will be here.
No.
You don't
I
care?
don't want it Friday noon.
No,
And if
I understand that you want a night meeting as opposed to. But I
Mr.
don't know
Chairman,
if it can be next
I really think it should be scheduled for our regular meeting next Thursday. I think it's of great importance and should be at the time when all of us have scheduled it in our programs that we don't have to rush off the afternoon.
The other thing is, we should not, as a body, get all exercised over this to the extent where we get emotionalized on it, because we're going to write a draft, we're going to have another public hearing, and we're going to be able to change this thing again. So let's not get over emotionalized right now that it's got to be this way. Let's keep an open mind, and let's go with the draft as Sherry suggests. We start off with single, and then we'll modify as we have these meetings. But let's keep a cool head on this thing.
All right, we have a motion. Sherry, how does that affect your program of work?
No, Mr. Chairman, we have not stayed on our schedule once again. So for the third week in a row, I will present to you at tomorrow noon's meeting a new, revised, more realistic schedule, which will include that.
Question, where is called?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing no opposition, so ordered. It'll be scheduled for next Thursday night.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to say that we have a new meeting tomorrow. This
Go on with the others.
What's after 10 o'clock?
well,
It's just what I have to know, but I just wanted to check on, you said city council for tomorrow, and
Thought we were just getting started.
yeah,
City Council Chambers.
we do
tomorrow.
have draft of the finance articles here tonight if you get to that point. 12 o'clock, good night.
I wanted to get that word in, that we do have that meeting tomorrow. Now, I think we had said at one point that we would attempt to end meetings at 10 o'clock. I think we ought to bring up the point that it is 10 o'clock, and we ought to make a decision whether we wish to go on. And since we're falling drastically behind on the schedule, I would suggest that we do continue.
Yeah.
I think so.
I think, yes, unless
think we should.
everybody's all shook up over.
Well,
No, I think everybody's calmed down sufficiently that we
I,
can
for
continue.
one, am tired tonight, but if you wish to continue a little longer, I would say another half an hour.
If we could at least, get an introduction here. We're going to be in trouble if we're almost. I can go to bed till 3:15. What's with you? What time
Did you get
go
up
to bed?
this morning?
6 o'clock.
You got me beat.
You would propose then going on to Articles 8 and 9?
I so moved.
Articles 8, 9, finance.
What else? What do you have, Sherry? What do you have?
Articles 8 and 9, and
Jane and I drink a lot.
Maybe that's my problem.
I gathered from Rick that he hadn't really had a chance to look over every comma in this, and I had cleaned up a few and changed a few.
In fact, we haven't looked over any comments.
But I think it's close enough.
No, I don't. I'm not going to give up my independent judgment. I was elected to exercise my judgment. That's why I'm
No, all I'm saying is we want to keep an open mind. Look at everything.
Calling folks during next week, would you be sure that everybody knows at least once that it's important that they be here next Thursday night?
First, I'll call Mr. Rowan and see if he's going to be in town.
We hired him, and that's when we wanted.
That's
That's when we
right.
wanted.
I couldn't make that clear.
I agree.
Did he be here?
That part.
All righty.
We expect him next Thursday.
On call, you mean, that he can hear us?
Next Thursday night, we
He
expect
said he was going to be available. We believe him.
And this was one of his arguments when we were deciding which to procure to use. We have.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that about security.
No, I think
That's true.
Reasonable stand.
That's true.
Why? I'm only hard at this when I really have to.
Is this the one Mary wanted to read?
We're paying him. He's not paying us.
Yeah, I know.
Is your
I just don't remember.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Article 8, Finance. Everyone here around the table was at the Saturday meeting except James. We attempted as a subcommittee to take the comments from that Saturday meeting, plus a few other ideas, and incorporate them in a rough draft. Just to move things along, I would move for adoption of Section 801 as submitted.
Moved and seconded that Section 801 as presented by the Charter Subcommittee, Charter Protection Committee.
There was
Any
a
questions? Discussion?
The thing that immediately I get hung up on is there's a difference, and I'm using accounting terminology, there's a difference between a fiscal year and a calendar year. And January 1 to December 31st is by nomenclature calendar year, and the other one is a fiscal year. I don't know, did the finance man write this?
Mr. Chairman, we had input from both finance people
And
that
this is a terminology.
they would function better if the fiscal year and the calendar year were synonymous.
Right. In other
If
words,
the fiscal year became the calendar year. Calendar year became the fiscal year.
Mr. Chairman,
Well, what I'm saying is January to December is calendar.
Mr. Chairman,
That's what they said they wanted.
a fiscal year can be the same as a calendar year. It also can be different. In
Yes.
this
No,
way,
I
it is more specific, so it takes over the calendar year, but I think that is the proper term.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Do they really mean the following year or the same year?
Could we just by common consent change that, because I think that's strictly,
Well, we could just strike of the following year and end it with December
Of that year.
of that year.
you want an amendment just to delete?
Well, whatever
Wait,
is appropriate, except that it doesn't seem
In
to
the
make
first
sense to me
sentence,
the
yeah,
way it
in
is.
the first sentence,
I
it
didn't
would
get any
mean,
further.
that would encompass 2 years.
Yeah.
So, I would say, of that year would probably be better. And the same thing with the next sentence.
That's strange.
I think,
No,
Mr.
that would begin the first day of July and end on the 30th day
That is
June of the
correct.
following
Of
year.
the
That
following
would be
year, I'm
correct.
sorry.
And that may be where the
Yeah.
confusion
Yeah, that
is in the typing somehow.
Mr.
Jane?
I'm sorry if I have to have people repeat things that I missed, but what's the rationale for having the fiscal year started in January? And the reason why I'm asking the question is that the local unit of government will, I'm sure, be dealing with funding and programs that come from both the state and the federal government, which operates on a fiscal year that's July to July, or June 30th to July. And I'm sorry to have to repeat this.
No. Mr. Chairman, Jane, we had both Bob Nelson and Norm Levesque. The borough, of course, is on the July 1st basis now, and that is mandated by state statute. Both of them felt for that the calendar year is far more appropriate. For instance, the big push of construction and heavy workload and so on, budgeting, all comes right during, when they're on the fiscal year starting with July 1. At the same time, they're attempting to close books. It's particularly onerous, would be for the city, is now for the borough, in that they have to wait until the budget is approved, which is pretty much at the end of May, prior to their being able to order supplies, equipment, capital improvements, the whole program for the fiscal year. They're almost through. Now, the question of state and federal funding didn't bother them at all. As a matter of fact, many of the federal programs, they indicated to us, might go from May 1st to, say, 1 quarter through or for a year and so on. The school district, however, is one that they felt needed to remain. Their whole thing of student records and student loads and projections and so on are just really tied into that. But there was very strong support from both of them to see that moved, since we're no longer governed by the state.
Okay, in relation to the school board's budget then,
They would be taking half of the year behind and half of the year behind and half of the year ahead. When they made their apportionment funds, which would be, they're off 6 months, and no matter how you figure it, somebody's likely to be off 6 months.
okay, would this assist or impair the school board's gripe that they don't have enough planning time before they have to get their kids out of, I mean, would they be in the middle of their planning cycle when they have to submit their budget? It's my question, because if they have to do it in December, based on September enrollments, and I just see one big mess with the school stuff.
It was indicated to us it was positive, and I think we'd need to have that written or have somebody to speak to that.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the idea was that the budget would then anticipate would take care of the first half of the school year, and that in that respect, they would be aided in that they would know very early at least what the first half of the year would be for programs, and they do things on a semester basis.
Mr. Chairman,
in schools.
I think that Sherry is mistaken. If our new year began January 1st, we would have been able to tell them what they would have from the following June through the following year, because theirs began 6 months after ours. And they would be funded through the first part of it.
Well, it depends on how you look at it, whether it's...
They would only be funded by the taxes for the first part of it.
a year and a
They
half.
get the funding for their second half the following fall. But we would be approving of the same budget that the school budget, as we are presently, but they'd get it sooner.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm with you. Marlis?
No, I think this is one that we need, again now, it was explained from the points of the finance directors that it was good to go back, when we do go back to the school administration, and I think we should send these sections out for their specific comments.
Chairman, I'm confused by Chet, and I wasn't there early enough for that Saturday meeting to really get this plugged into me either. But I wonder, is there some way to get the legislative and municipal years somewhere together so that all of this back and forthness is gone? Not possible?
It's possible, you can always do. But the explanation I got from them in a way of costs, the low period of their year, the planning part of their year and everything was winter for both the assembly and for the city. Whereas it's the reverse in the school district. The low period of their year is the summer. That's the period of time when they do their planning and do other type of work. And so obviously for benefit of the school people, it should be a June to June or June to July.
Because of the nature of the school year.
Because of the nature of the school year. And because of the nature of the city and the borough functions and what they have to do, the building and everything else that they are involved in, they felt that the December, January 1 to December was a better period for them.
including
They,
utilities.
they did not indicate to us at all that there would be any difficulty as far as arranging the handling of the school district funding. I said they didn't see any problem at all. Now, they are not the school district, but this was their view of it. Jane?
We're making political comments.
I've dealt quite a bit with federal and state funding agencies, and when a local unit of government is required to put up matching money, then that occurs at the time that the grant goes in, which assumes that you would have allocated those monies in some form, say by July, which means that you're going to have to know by previous November that potential federal programs are coming up, so you can allocate them in a budget that you pass on in January. Now, a lot of times, we don't know 6 months in advance what the feds are going to do.
Neither do the feds.
I know, but what I'm saying is,
Are you saying that because the federal fiscal year is July?
Wasn't there an indication that there was apt to be a change either
It's under
the state or the
consideration.
federal?
It's under
Is it?
consideration.
Federal, I think, is there.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the change of all things is they're talking now in terms of an October year. But I think the best thing, Jane, and not to, to knock it down, but the best thing to say is that we have both of them who have had many, many years in municipal accounting and worked, Norm worked both in the city and now with the borough. And both of them shook their hands with glee almost at the idea of a calendar year. They have, of course, handled many federal funds and grants and foresaw no problem with it.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things that both of them agreed on was that both the public works and the utilities practically had to have a January budget date to be able to order their stuff in order to work part of the summer.
Yeah, the rationale on the relationship to state funds, or did that not
Didn't
get
seem that it
figured out?
didn't think about us at all.
Mr. Chairman?
There's no problem, Arliss.
Right, just some discussion on the question of revenue funding. There is always the problem on schools, but for instance, your revenue sharing now is so much per capita, and it's a pretty easy figure to estimate into a budget. And so this doesn't seem to create any problem at all.
And the proposed new revenue sharing procedures that are proposed would still be, or if they have idea what they were going to have, pretty close.
We are still, Jane?
yeah, I would move that we table this section until we've had some feedback from the school people about how they think their system would work with this.
Let's tentatively approve it and then check with them, and if it's wrong, change it.
Is there a table to the motion?
Well, if we can get that
Mr.
moved
Chairman,
anyway.
I have a question. Are we discussing this tonight or are we adopting it?
Going on, however.
Well, let's say we're temporarily adopting it to get on with it.
Mr. Chairman, I had put down things for discussion and then for adoption, and in working with this, I think that the Assembly article showed us pretty well that last week we discussed it. The idea was that we would sort of pro forma adopt it, and we wound up discussing it 2 weeks in a row because people had forgotten the discussion from the previous week. Therefore, I think it's not going to be workable to discuss the fiscal year and then discuss it again before we adopt it. I think it will work better if we just go through and adopt as we go.
Right. Let's knock off the
Okay,
nitpicking.
Mr. Chairman,
I
I
have
make a
one
move
question.
that we take a question here on 801.
Well,
There's a motion on the floor, if there's no further discussion, and that motion was to adopt 801 as presented, and there was no, although we jointly allowed as how they be following should be changed to that. There was no motion to that, or no adoption of a change.
We decided that just a stylistic change would be, it would read December of that year, and then it would read the fiscal year of the school district shall begin, and that is as written the following year.
All right, if there's no further discussion, question, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Mr. Chairman, I would move for adoption of section 802.
Second.
As a
Been
matter
moved,
of
adopted,
form, there would not be a subsection A because there's just one section.
been moved and seconded that we adopt section 802 as presented without the A.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's important to just tell a little bit of what we're attempting to accomplish here. A 6-year program for public services, fiscal policies, and capital improvement. Instead of thinking in terms of a more normal figure of 5 years, what we're talking about is a budget year, which will take the first of that 6th year and implement those things, and then you go on with the normal 5-year period. So each year as you come along, you lock off, and a year of your capital improvements then becomes your fiscal policy, your operating budget for the year. But this brings in and it engendered a lot of discussion, this question of fiscal policies. It's a major job that we're really talking about, and it's carried on in 803, that we're really saying to the government that they need to look ahead and determine what the impact of, say, a capital improvements program is going to be in terms of operating budget and maintenance and so on down the road. And it's something that really I think is only able to be really done with the computer now. It's going far beyond. People think in terms of a capital improvement programming as being the be-all and end-all, and really all that does is to program for buildings and major items. When we get into the fiscal implications in the next, when we get into fiscal policy, we're really insisting on a great deal more of financial planning than we're presently getting. And Mr. Nelson from the city felt that was just a really neat idea. However, he was almost overwhelmed at the idea of it, and yet he feels it will never be done unless it's spelled out as a requirement. And obviously, it isn't something that's done overnight.
Does the assembly
We propose that we give them a reasonable transition period to get into it.
And we felt just by the fact that it's there that it's going to be, just like the capital improvements program, I've seen the birth of it with the borough from almost nothing to starting to pull together to be a working document. And
Sounds good.
did I relate?
You related it very well. Sounds good. Is there any further discussion on it? Question? Question has been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? So
Mr.
ordered.
Chairman, I move for adoption of section 803,
Second.
eliminating the A.
Boy, you're really
Is
right.
there any discussion on the section 803, operating and capital budget?
Didn't you leave something out of here about the... Oh, no, okay.
The mayor shall submit to the assembly at least 90 days before the end of the fiscal year the proposed operating and capital budget, the form and...
We've got it in twice, sir.
Huh?
We've got the same thing in 802 and 803. It's according to what heading we want to use.
Form and content of the budget shall be consistent.
It's two ways of saying it.
Your program. The
No,
mayor
we're talking about budget for one, Mary.
submit with the budget an analysis of the fiscal implications of all tax levies and programs.
One is the budget, one is the program.
We've already spoken to the capital budget.
Yeah, we're trying. Well, let's see.
Now you're talking about both operating and capital budget.
No, one is for
One
the
is the
6
plan.
year. One is the plan.
One is a plan, and
6-year
the
plan.
other two are the budgets that underlie that plan.
Mr. Chairman, just again, to recap on this 80-day figure, there was a great deal of discussion between the city and the borough finance people as to 90 days and 45, and it seemed that the 90 days was a more realistic time and could be accomplished, say, when they talked about the January 1 through December 31.
Mr. Chairman, I would add that if you look further down the Assembly action on the budget in 805, they must dispense with the budget at least 21 days prior to the end of the fiscal year. So that means that the 90-day provision that you have in 803 is really reduced to just over 60 days,
79.
which the Assembly has to act on it before it becomes law without their... I would call for the question.
69.
Question has been called for.
Mr. Chairman,
Mary?
I am still bothered because I'm reasonably sure that the capital budget, as Norm was speaking of it, included this maintenance, operation, and personnel as part of it, and that they really were speaking to both of them, and that we don't need two sections for this.
Mary, I think if you remember Bob Nelson said that he felt that the operating budget must be mentioned. Remember, he was sitting there and saying it won't. It becomes part of the. It becomes part of the operating budget. That the planning and everything has to consider the planning for the operating budget for succeeding years. In other words, 2 years down the road, you build a new building and you've got to operate that building, and that's going to be considered in the planning for the operating budget. I thought
I'm still agreeing with you. I'm still agreeing with you. I'm not disagreeing with you. But I think that we can combine those two paragraphs into one, sir, and do exactly what they said, because we are wanting the capital budget, which to them includes the financial plan of the projected operating costs. And these are our two budgets, the proposed operating budget for this year, but we have the capital budget also, and both of them we're telling to come in 90 days before. And we're saying that the capital budget is to include the maintenance, projected maintenance, operation, and personnel costs for the future years.
Fred?
I tend to agree with Mary because your budgets are related to your master plan. I mean, one underlies the other, so they should be combined.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if I might make a suggestion that if we could pass on the motion or act on the motion before us, and then, if it's appropriate, I'd make a motion to request the attorney to attempt to draft then 802 and 803 into one
Fine.
section.
Let's do it.
Okay, call for
I'll
the
agree
question?
with that.
Okay.
Any further discussion?
Question.
Question's been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman?
Opposed? No opposition? Motion passed.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we request Rick to bring back for commission consideration a statement that would combine section 802 and 803, including the content of those two sections.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we request our attorney to bring back a combined 802 and 803, covering all the items in both.
Well, Mr. Chairman, why bring it back here? If we agree in content on what it is, it's just a stylizing thing. Let's agree in principle on it, that it'll be combined to say this. No need to bring it back to us. And
Well,
like that-
not for action, but just to
Yeah.
give it
To
to us.
report, just to give it to us.
Well, we're gonna get that anyhow,
Yeah.
when the whole thing's done, so.
He's going to hide it from us.
Mr. Chairman, it's not the intent to react upon it. It's only, if there's any problem, why, then we can consider it. Otherwise, put it in your notebook.
All right. Is there any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Mr. Chairman, I would move for adoption of Section 84.
Question, point of order, Chairman, what did we just pass? 802 or 802 and 803?
803.
802 once,
Combined.
and then 803, and then we passed a motion
To
for
combine.
the combination of the two of them by the attorney.
Right.
That's what we did. That's what we did.
All right.
That's what
We're
I
all
feel.
right. We're all right, let's see.
We have a motion on the floor to adopt Section 804 budget hearing as presented by the Charter Protection Committee. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Parsons?
can someone explain the question mark to me?
So,
Evie?
I have no idea. It was in Rick, it was in Rick's tape. He apparently had some question.
Mr. Chairman?
That was long enough for Sean.
Yeah,
I
that's what it is.
think that what we had asked that we do is say not later than 7 days prior to final adoption. So I would move to amend the motion to read,
Not less than 7 days prior to the motion.
it's not less than 7 days.
Second. Mr. Chairman,
not less than 7 days.
7 days?
prior to final adoption.
That's where we ended up.
Mr. Chairman, on that, Mary brought out a very valid point before we really looked at, I think, what both the city and the borough had. And it's a question, for example, of things are hot and heavy and the legislative body's holding a public hearing and there's tremendous pressure, and without really taking the public's testimony into account, they act at that very time that they've had their final public hearing. And I think it's part of it's just a safeguard of allowing some
Cool off.
extra time, cooling off time, I guess.
Mr.
Sherry?
Chairman, I hesitated before saying the 7 because I was reading this over, and not less than doesn't mean anything to me. I would prefer that it read not later than.
You mean they could only have 7 days?
Well, I'm unclear as to what not less than 7 days prior to final adoption means.
It has to be prior. It has to be at least 7 days prior. And Rick told us that if you said 7 days prior, that really meant 8 days prior. Because you
Yes, well,
started
it's
counting
just
the
the
day
term
after.
less that I'm quarreling
I
with.
think that's
Not
right.
less than
That's
7
the problem.
Not fewer than 7 days away.
There has to be at least 7 days, is what it says.
It could be 14 days before, it could be 21 days before, but not less than 7 days before.
And the rational, what you just said is that decisions towards the end would be made more in a frenzied state, that the people...
There tends to be that the legislative body has to come to some sort of agreement, and you balance one factor against the other, and you try to come out with a budget that everybody can agree to. And to try to do that after you've had a long public hearing, when folks are worn out and it may be 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, is not good for the public.
Yeah, and I have objected to it in past years personally, that something gets passed the night of the final public hearing and you have been
I
shafted.
I object.
So what you're saying, this is a safeguard of the public
It's
because
a
they have to
safeguard of the
have
public.
their public hearings over, and then the Assembly assembly takes action in another meeting?
Yes,
Next
right.
week. Following week.
After the public hearing, at least a week,
Okay,
the
I
action
can,
takes place.
I can see somebody picking this up and saying, why do we only get 7 days to react to the budget? Which,
No.
you know,
No.
that's how some people would react to 7.
The budgets are available 90 days before.
Right.
The budgets are available when they're available to
I
the
know that.
assembly.
Well, then it says that. But I don't know that it would be considered that way.
Mr. Chairman, Jane, it's interesting that it was, of course, maybe they were working from the city charter then, but the city charter as well as the, this charter spoke to it, didn't it?
No.
No, it did not speak to it.
It says 21.
And that was,
No, but that's different, that's different.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Jane, do you want somewhere in 802 and 3 where it talks about the 90 days previous submitted to the assembly and the public? At least 90 days previous
Well,
submitted to the assembly and the public at least 90 days previous. That would take care of your concern.
yeah, I think that would do it. My
Well,
concern again is
a question,
that there would...
Jim, is it not true that is it true that anytime anything is submitted to a public body, it is then public information?
That's true. That's true.
Mr.
But
Chairman,
if it
could-
bothers you, we could add that word.
Could we hear from Jane as to, I'm not quite sure I understand what your concern is, Jane.
All right, my concern is that to have public hearings not less than 7 days before you finally adopt does not preclude that you can't have them, quite ways in the future. But an individual who's reading the charter may misconstrue that, and I think this is a point that will probably come up when people react to it, and they'll say, you may only get 7 days to react to the budget.
Yeah,
And
And this would take
I
care of that.
understand what you're saying, that it gets hot and heavy towards the end, but I would prefer 14.
I can see,
Wait a minute.
I hear what you're saying.
What you're saying is
Just the opposite of what this says.
just the opposite of what this says. This says
That they can't...
that the public's input must come at least a week before the assembly acts. And you're saying the public's input has to come 2 weeks before the assembly acts. And that's putting it a little far off. You want the public...
for me it isn't. I have been in that legislative turmoil and seen it operate on the local level, and I don't think a week is long enough before adoption for the public to be heard. And they could wait, sure, they can hold it
Okay,
before.
now, Jim is doing exactly what I think people will do. You're saying two completely different things.
All right, wait a minute.
Well, let Jane.
But what you're wanting to say is may be heard from 90 days right on through
To set.
until 7 days before the assembly acts.
But if my memory is correct, I've gone down to sit on the budget at the city council in years past, and I was chairman of the park board, and I felt shafted, the fact that we didn't get any chance to testify until the thing was just about ready to be passed, and it was always within a week of passing, and that was it. That was the dialogue. They deigned to listen to us that 7 days before, and that was it.
Sherry?
I would try this on before proposing it as an amendment, and if we said, the Assembly shall hold public hearings on the proposed budget and 6-year program. These public hearings must be completed at least 7 days prior to final adoption. The idea being that the process of hearing the public must be finished by that date.
I don't know what that isn't that very well with me either, because I don't know what to say, but I'm trying to think.
Mr. Chairman, in response to Jim's problem, and we're really not addressing it, is that both the budget, or the borough and the city use what they call euphemistically or something or other, work sessions. And the actual really peeling, adding, whatever to the budget gets done there. And you are, in fact, pretty correct in that when that goes to public hearing, now, I mean, the sophisticated person can pretty well get to those meetings. Sometimes they're advertised, they set, a series of public hearings, but a lot more is done, and, you have work sessions, Marion,
Just like
Saturdays,
tonight.
Sundays, and all the rest of it. And there's a great deal of it that's really done in that. I don't know that we can, as a matter of fact, change that. The intent of this section, maybe we need to add something, is really to, again, back to do one thing, and that is to protect the public from hasty action taken. If that's the only public hearing they have, of just zip, that's the night it gets done, and there's no time for some thoughtful consideration of this thing. Your problem is a different problem of how to open the process really more to people that are acting on it. And I don't know the answer, and yours too, Jan.
Perhaps 14 days isn't too bad an idea. At least it does get it done a little earlier. It does put it perhaps before they've completed work on the budget.
At the present time, is there a set number of hearings they have to hold, or is it just one?
To my knowledge, it really, all they need to do is hold 80 public hearings.
One hearing. Isn't it one hearing?
Mr. Chairman,
Sherry?
what I'm afraid of is this, that the Assembly will submit its, or the mayor will submit the budget at the 90-day date. It will come before the Assembly, and they will immediately hold a public hearing on the mayor's budget as submitted. They will take the public testimony, and the public will be speaking to that document. And then they will go into work session, and they'll do all sorts of things to that budget, and then pass on it without ever having another public hearing. And what we were trying to do here, I think, is ensure that right before the passage of it, after the work sessions and so forth have changed and maybe drastically changed the document, that the public will have a crack at it at least right the week before it's passed.
Okay,
I may.
that I understand, only I don't, and the way it's written, it does protect it, but there's going to have to be a note or something explaining that that's the intent of the thing. The way you said it just now is great.
Doesn't it say
But
that?
Fred,
It can be
It's in
construed
writing, Mr.
otherwise. It could be construed otherwise.
It does
Fred.
not say
That's what
that.
they're pointing out.
it says
It
that
could be construed.
Listen to Frank, he's right.
this does not say that it shall be 7 days before. It says it shall be any time between presentation and 7 days before. That's what it says. When you say not less than 7
Really,
days.
I agree.
Any time from the first presentation to the moment 7 days before.
But in practice, what eventually transpires is it happens 8 days before, and all aboard, or you're lost, or you're left. The railroad, the train is moving. And I had been part of that process that architects call a cachette, which is a 72-hour drive where you sleep on your legislative desk until you give in. And I don't think the public is well served unless there is protection from that kind of process.
Mr. Chairman, part of what we were attempting to do by setting the 90 days too was to lengthen the process. So there would be more time for, the consideration of the budget.
Okay, how about
There.
if to get at what you're saying, how about if you say one public hearing must be held 7 days prior to the final adoption after work sessions. Or something like that that says, or 2 weeks or whatever. We got two completely different things here. One is you get a crack at it the last time, and yours is, well, you not only get a crack at it, but you get to change it.
Right.
Exactly.
And so,
That's the meaning of a public hearing. It's not to be just say, well, we did this, what are you going to do about it? The meaning of a public hearing, as I understand it, is so that
The input gets
some
heard.
input will be registered.
The input not only gets heard, but it can be included in the action.
We have to have 2 cents, why is
I think it's the same thing.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to postpone,
Thoroughly agree with you.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to postpone consideration of 804 budget hearing until the next regular meeting, at which time the Charter Production Committee will come back with revised wording.
with the words,
Second?
Agreed.
Been moved. Now, we have on the floor at the moment a motion to accept,
Mr.
a motion to amend,
And they all go with this motion.
That's correct.
and they all,
They all get on this motion and go with it.
and this is a motion to postpone.
To the
till
next regular,
Regular meeting, which is Wednesday. No, wait a minute.
To the
Yeah,
next.
Wednesday.
full meeting.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye?
Those opposed? So ordered.
Mr. Chairman, just one question of Jim now, just to restate that. First of all, you want somehow to ensure a public hearing prior to 7 days before, is
Yes,
that?
and this does not guarantee it. What happens is many times things are done in work session and they really finalize in the work session.
All right,
And they do a polite,
thank you.
less majesty kind
Okay,
of thing that
just-
you're tolerated at the hearing and listened to kind of.
One other thing, do you think it's an important issue enough so that it should be spoken to in the charter?
Enough so that I have seen citizens frothing at the mouth at these public hearings.
We'll get you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make some comments in relation to that. I made a move this year that all work sessions be special meetings. I didn't succeed, and I think it would have been for the public good to have the special meetings at which there would be audience participation. They would have assured more assemblymen's presence.
Why didn't they support you, Mary?
They said it was too costly.
That's right, we get paid as a special meeting,
They said it
They
was
also come to meetings if they're special.
Mr. Chairman, I'd
I
like to
have
ask
been to
Jim
numerous,
quickly, would you look at
Only 3 there.
804 in the 71 charter? Do you have it there?
What article is it, 8?
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be something like that, you know.
Does the within 21 days following their receipt,
Yeah,
Answer you.
Yes, it adds an interesting dimension that precludes just that one time
Okay,
participation.
well, we'll work along
Yeah.
with
just so we
something.
had the proper direction? Okay, Mr. Chairman, I would move for adoption of section 805.
Second,
Been moved and seconded, adoption of section 805, assembly action on the budget. Lisa?
I have a question. It says this district's budget may be increased or decreased only as to the total amount. That means that you're saying the school board brings you the budget and the assembly says, okay, take $10 million off somewhere. That's all they can do.
Right, but they cannot line item view.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, do you agree that's a good thing
Yeah,
for your
I
school?
was just confused as to the way that this is written.
Okay.
How the phraseology.
Yeah.
Do you think that is unclear?
Let's see.
As to the total amount.
Mr. Chairman, might point out that 21 days prior to the end of the fiscal year was to the difficulty of getting people in over the holiday time, I think, was the major thing, and to see that you'd have a fuller member of your legislative body present.
I gave him,
You get one. Oh.
Call for the question?
Question has been called for. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? So ordered. Chair will entertain a
Mr.
motion.
Chairman, I would move for adoption of Section 806.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Adoption of Section 806 is presented by the Charter Production Committee. Any discussion?
Can I read it first?
Oh, read it.
Here's your wording. Is for that fiscal year, the 15 parentheses
How's that?
in 806B, second line PM.
And as a match was that rather than make quotation.
What did the parenthesis mean
oh,
in B?
I think he,
When's the other one?
I think he was just elaborating on it, making it more.
I get it, but he meant it was only,
I mean, is it to be left in the text, or to explain it to us, or to explain it to the public, or?
It is a qualification on the word revenues,
Then
in
we,
anticipation only of the revenues for that fiscal year and
So
not
it should
of
be, yeah.
succeeding fiscal years.
it really doesn't need the parenthesis then, to that.
I think that you're mistaken. I think that the parentheses should be out because the notes shall be repaid prior to the end of the next fiscal year. If you had it in that fiscal year, you wouldn't be having to make an emergency appropriation.
So the parenthesis,
The parentheses should be out.
the parenthesis out.
as I said at the outset, Rick did not have a chance to go over these. This is just how it came over the tape.
Okay.
If during it.
Okay.
For the next fiscal year.
Yeah, give us a minute on this, because we hassled this one on here. I wonder why he uses notes instead of note anticipation, or anticipation notes.
Mr. Chairman, this wording
Just a
is,
formal wording for it.
if you remove the parentheses, this wording is the same as in the 71 charter, except and sale of has been added.
Yeah, okay.
So it's identical to what the 71 charter contained.
And it
to what the finance people said was, was fine and reasonable.
And it did include for that fiscal year.
Without the parentheses, so I would drop the parentheses.
Okay.
That must have been some question Rick had in his own mind.
I have a question on section C. In section C, does that mean that the assembly can raise taxes in the middle of the fiscal year to meet budget expenses?
Yes?
This, I think, Jane, speaks about a particular case, and it's there's something I think in state law about this, but and Rick may have to tell us about it. But I think in the case where you have an area like Ocean View, for instance, that might want to have a particular service that began in the middle of a year, the Assembly could authorize a supplemental levy
the supplemental levy.
Mr. Chairman,
Arliss?
Mike?
on this particular one, both Norm and Bob said eliminate it if you can. However, the question was raised as to the necessity to check state law on that. I would suggest that we ask the attorney to check on that, and obviously he's not here, that we pass this section and then make a motion to somehow to refer this to the borough attorney for clarification as to its necessity.
Wait, I'm just confused.
You can have a
For
separate-
any reason,
Yeah.
the assembly can vote to increase taxes, and do we at another place, someplace, talk about the procedures that they have to go through to do that? Do we address that anyplace else?
No, the point is, and we don't particularly like it, and I think pretty much said to the attorney, we didn't want it unless we needed it there, and that, he's not here to ask. Okay. Because we had the finance people telling us no, and I think, I don't like the idea.
The discussion was all unfavorable to having this in there.
Mr. Chairman, move to delete item C.
Second.
And Mr. Chairman,
Moved and seconded, delete item C.
all right, if this passes, then make a motion to request the opinion of the attorney on this as to the necessity of having it in the charter.
That'll be subsequent to this.
Yeah, right.
Is there any further discussion on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed?
Make a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
make a, we still have a motion on.
Still have a motion.
Excuse me.
Yes. We have a motion on to adopt as amended. Is there any further discussion? Jane?
I'm sorry, I'm just really dumb about finances. Is it the intent or is the meaning of Section 8, if you find out you got more money than you budgeted for, you can appropriate? Is that what that means?
Yes, if they have an overrun.
When's the last time that happened?
3 months.
Well,
Adjudication
usually
recap-
you can have an overrun in revenues.
Okay, we can strike all
They
that.
want to spend it.
Mr. Chairman,
I-
no, yeah, but that is true, but a very real one could be, for instance, if the legislature, because of a particular situation, granted more impact funds, that you could immediately put that to purpose. But conversely, we did not want to allow them to get into a position of deficit spending. Okay.
All right, fine. But we end up with more money than we spent.
Any
I
further
like that
discussion on
attitude.
passing section 806 as amended? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? So ordered.
Mr.
Chairman,
Chairman,
that's far enough.
just let me make one more, little one, quick. Move to send to the attorney, because it catch things on tape, I guess, 806C for his comment as to why it should or should not be included in the charter.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to pass to the attorney for his comment on why 806C should be in the charter. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? So ordered.
Chairman, I would suggest that we have probably reached the end for this evening, and I will, on my new revised calendar, schedule the consideration of the rest of this and the next one. I would wonder if it's appropriate now under the agenda for me to say some things about the Charter Production Committee. I would like to know if, when I make up my new calendar, whether, as a matter of equity, we could next week have our meeting on Tuesday and Thursday. And I asked Mary if on a one-time basis, she might be able to attend a Tuesday night meeting. I
So next week on the 29th, I've committed. I
Now,
have
on
a
the-
meeting then too, Mary.
On the 15th, no, let's see. That would be on the 15th. If it's possible, it does, you are committed on the
Yes,
15th?
I am.
Can I ask a question about this? Are Wednesdays now considered regularly scheduled meetings also?
Through this month, they have been on the calendar, but I would like to have next week a Tuesday and Thursday meeting. It gives us time between the two meetings to do some committee work.
I could meet, say, at 5:30, 5:30, have a late afternoon meeting.
No,
The folks could
we've had to have people miss occasionally, and I feel it's important that we all said that we could all make Thursdays. And Tuesdays and Wednesdays were kind of a toss-up, and some people had to
Yeah.
miss Wednesday and some people had to miss Tuesday.
Well, I would appreciate once in a while a Tuesday meeting. I am committed to Wednesdays and cannot be here, and in a way feel badly in that I attend all of the Charter Commission and I'm not production. I'm not here to assist in passing on some of the
Quite
comments.
frankly, I find it terribly burdensome to be the only, Lisa has attended faithfully to meetings, but I feel that we ought to have as many of the charter production members present as possible. I think Lisa would agree with me that it makes things easier when I can't remember all the things, and I can't possibly take the notes from the subcommittee meetings to report back to you.
I do think one thing, that whether they're Tuesday or Wednesday meetings, these really basic things, since we
Have
have
got
a
to be on a
problem,
regular meeting.
cannot be considered. I understand. Yeah. You could, you're not objecting. Okay. Kim, I said, I put earlier in the meeting that I really have committed myself on the 15th as well. What do you do if it were community,
Tomorrow noon,
school council?
we haven't set it for next week.
Darnell changed themselves from Thursday to Tuesday.
Sherry,
Accommodate me.
do you have further
Can't,
for the commission?
and I told you even then I would miss some, but I can't miss
Tuesday?
two in a row.
I would,
I'll go for Tuesday. I'll move that we go to Tuesday.
No, I think you
do we,
I think you can do it.
I think I'll just do it without a motion. That's all right.
Yeah, but people better be told.
Yes, I plan to make up a whole new schedule.
Will you have a forum with Joe Bond and
That's easy to know.
Yes.
Next
Mr.
week,
Chairman,
Tuesday.
do we have in our rules, Arliss, anything about notification of the intent to be absent from a scheduled meeting?
I don't think we speak specifically to that.
We had a most embarrassing time last Friday
Yeah,
when we
we
had
really
4 experts in attendance at a meeting on a Friday noon, which was to have been a regular commission meeting, and we did not have a quorum, and we waited.
Madam Chairman?
And I realize
cried.
that, Mary, I'm not speaking at anyone in particular. There was confusion about where the meeting place was to be.
I didn't arrive until
And Frank was
12:30
confused,
because
so
I came
obviously-
out here and did the same thing Jim did Saturday morning. I came
Well,
out here.
I kept crying until 1 o'clock, and I said, shoot.
I'm not trying to slap hands here. What I'm trying to do is prevent in the future the scheduling of a meeting and ensure the ability to notify those who can attend the meeting in advance. And so, could we say that, add to our rules of procedure that
suggest that at an early time that Sherry drop some wording and lay it on us. Oh, okay. Lay on something about excused absences, okay?
Okay, let's ask another question then.
Before you, don't go away, people.
With,
Keep going, I'm not going out the door.
I'm of the opinion that once upon a time, we said regularly scheduled meetings were on Thursday.
Correct.
And that most important decisions should be made at meetings due to everybody having to reroute their schedules. And when we do stuff on Wednesday, you're out, and we do stuff on Tuesday, you're out. And if it's a problem with attendance, that's unfortunate, but I think everybody breaks their neck to get to as many meetings as they can. And so, if you want to go through a whole number of, you're back early, you're back, or if you don't come, that's too bad, because I think everybody is really working.
You know, what I intend, Jane, is to be able to amend the schedule so that we don't have, well, for instance, tonight, we were discussing a form of government, and even if we had all of the statistics on hand, I think it would have been unfortunate lacking 3 members of the commission to discuss something quite so important as that.
I think people ought to tell, where they are.
Well, Jane, I think we'll be also appreciative of the workload that Sherry has on the guy. It's not an easy job, and she's been devoting a hell of a lot of time to it. And where we can, I think we want to cooperate with her to keep it on schedule. I don't think Sherry's slapping anybody's hand, but she's taken on a pretty big job, and I think it's incumbent upon us to help her whenever we can.
Your bylaws committee will take this under advisement, and I think we were going through this at 2:30 last night, and it's better just to be quiet and smile at everybody instead of trying to decide.
Well, what announcements have you got? Not decisions.
I have another thing on the agenda, and that's persons to be heard now on the agenda. I see Mr. Keller here and the vice
Well, I always see him any day.
I'm coming back.
Just a couple of quick comments on the multi-member district question.
Lay it on us,
The
Mel.
way I calculated the statistical question, only 39% of the people favor single-member districts. It appears to me, seriously, that if the question is put on the ballot for people to choose, it shouldn't be between 2 different types of single-member districts, but it should be between a single-member district plan and a multi-member district plan. And let them take their choice at that point, but don't wire it into single-member districts. I don't think that would be fair. I also think it would be a mistake to leave the reapportionment up to the commission, because it can be a very serious problem in the transition as to the fact that the voters will never have an opportunity to vote on the reapportioned body that's going to represent them. So I think that if there's going to be a single-member district plan presented to them, that the charter will have to do the reapportionment, or at least the district boundaries will have to appear in the charter.
Are you making a recommendation at this time?
Legally,
Yeah, I would say don't leave it up to the commission. I think that's another one of the reasons for 20% of people to vote against the charter, because they don't want some commission to tell them who's going to represent them. One last thing, on the supplemental appropriation from 806, when I read Part A here, the gist of what I get out of here is that if revenues ever do exceed the budget, then we get to spend more money. I think that the emphasis ought to be turned around so that it says something like, the Assembly may make supplemental appropriations only if the mayor certifies the revenues exceed budget estimates. And the hope being that when we do have revenue surpluses, that we won't spend it. We won't have to spend it, but we'll be able to carry more and reduce taxes.
All right, Mel, state your comment again. All right.
Well, I'd almost turn that sentence around and say that the Assembly may make supplemental appropriations only if the mayor certifies that revenues exceed budget estimates.
It is the mayor that
Except
certifies,
just
finance officer
Look
certifies.
at D, right below that. If you say that they may make supplemental appropriations only, then they couldn't do B, could they?
Well, I would say that, to me, this is an emergency ordinance. D talks more about emergency ordinances than about appropriations. Just the only thing I would hate to see is that there's a provision in here that guarantees that all revenue will be spent. I'd say that we maybe can force or give direction to local government to try to save money, conserve money, and so forth.
And
Under the emergency provision, I'm not sure I understand it. You know, in listening to your comments, I was confused about that too, because it appears to me that it's possible that this emergency situation comes up after the taxes have been collected.
Right.
that is correct.
That's why it's in
Then
the next
you don't have any anticipated revenues for the fiscal year you're in right now.
That's right. That's what I
Okay.
said.
Yeah.
So you're.
That is the problem.
That's why it allows
That
it
is
to be
the-
paid in the next fiscal year.
Yeah, so normally tax anticipation notes, at least to my understanding, is always applied the following year.
Next
Following
year,
the fiscal year.
next tax period.
No,
No.
no, okay. Let me say that, as far as my understanding of it, and I can't verify this absolutely right, but if in the January 1, you are out of money, you have taxes then will be due on May 15th.
Right.
You can run a tax anticipation note anticipating those taxes. And again, on June 30, you're out, and the taxes are going to come in September 15th. You can run a tax anticipation note, it should be paid immediately after September 15th. But if on December 15th, the earthquake happens, ocean wheel flies into the ocean, and we have to do something. We're
When it's set for that fiscal year,
We need to
that seemed to
go over that
preclude the possibility of ever appropriating money between the last collection period and the end of the year. I don't know.
We'll take a look at that, because
That still bothers me.
yeah, we need to,
I still can't.
Actually, it has to be between the last collection period and the next collection period. That's where the problem comes.
how many?
You have two collections in a year. Between the second
Anything else?
collection,
No.
the first collection that you may get into trouble.
You agree with that 39%, Lisa, on single district?
39%, 39%.
Move for German?
Meeting is adjourned.
Pretty good.
How many of you guys are going to be there tomorrow noon?
You got the majority.
You'll be there tomorrow noon?
But you can't take up the street, you know, everybody else that ran out said, well, we should put somebody else in there.
One vote.
You're going to be at city council tomorrow noon?
On your earlier question,
Good.
have somebody two ways, but unfortunately, it has to be in, I think, by Wednesday at 5.